Chapter 131 The First Trial. 1. Do you know what the first task will be? Cedric asked quickly. If they really knew what the first task would be before everyone else, Hogwarts' chances of winning would increase significantly. I do. Blinking innocently, Luna looked at the shadow without hiding her nefarious intent towards Baskerville. But I won't tell. Asterion, Rose, and Cedric had already guessed Luna's purpose from the look she gave Asterion's shadow. Looking at his own shadow, Asterion mentally apologized to his companion. As if knowing what was about to happen, little Baskerville backed away, pleading with his eyes, but it was useless. He was a majestic special-grade cursed spirit. He refused to be petted by a young human. Sorry, but I'll have to sacrifice you for a while. Asterion murmured and didn't hesitate to force Baskerville out of his shadow and into Luna's arms. He, stroking the silky, soft fur, Luna laughed and showed an incomparably satisfied expression. Who's the cutest boy in the world? It's you. Baskerville looked at his master, pleading to be taken out of the arms of this crazy woman, but Asterion turned his head and looked at the wall as if appreciating its beauty. I can't see exactly what's going to happen, but Professor McGonagall will create a vast space covered with forests, mountains, and lakes. All representatives from the 13 schools will be thrown into this space to do something. Sitting on the floor with Baskerville in her lap, Luna spoke casually while stroking the belly of the hundred-eyed dog. Compared to the tournament, Luna was more interested in Baskerville. She had seen some very interesting scenes involving the demon dog and his master, Asterion Black. Luna's words made Cedric reflect deeply. Will we be forced to fight each other? If that were the case, Hogwarts would be at a great disadvantage. He could imagine that all the other schools would focus on them, not just because they were the strongest team with Asterion and Rose, but also because they were the most familiar with the terrain. It's possible, but I don't think it will be that simple. Rose nodded and continued. Probably the team that wins will have to get something, a flag for example, located in a specific and difficult-to-access place. Cedric and Asterion agreed with Rose's words. If the first task was like that, then they really had to worry about the other schools teaming up and focusing on their team. We need to strategize to divide the teams. If we leave things as they are, most will join forces and target us. Asterion said, stroking his beardless chin and thinking. Then his eyes lit up as if he had thought of something. We can use the animosity between countries to prevent the teams from uniting. Showing a malicious smile, Asterion finished his proposal. Cedric thought for a moment and agreed. Although it wasn't in his nature to do something like this, he wasn't against it, not when something so important was at stake. Rose naturally accepted. She showed an excited smile, thinking about the fight she would have in a few days. Only those at the top of the world know how lonely it is at the top. It had been years since she had participated in a decent fight. Although she wouldn't use all her power in the tournament, a fight was still a fight. Japan and China won't ally under any circumstances, so we don't need to worry about them. Russia and the United States probably won't ally either, but those two might team up in a moment of need. That leaves 8, probably 4 of those 8 will join one side in this first task. The other 4 might do the task solo or also join one of the powers, Russia or the United States. Asterion shared the information he knew with his future teammates. Rose and Cedric also began to think about the information Asterion had provided. Asterion, can you observe the entire future battlefield? Cedric asked with a serious expression. He didn't formally address the extremely powerful young man as other students did. They were companions, and in his eyes, they were united at this moment. Having eyes on the battlefield would be extremely important, especially knowing where all the teams were located. They could even ambush some teams along the way, reducing the number of rivals. Asterion didn't mind being called by his name and thought for a moment before giving his answer. I can summon about 40 observers, cursed spirits that I created to watch. I can summon more, but with the amount of magical energy allowed for me, this quantity is the best in emergencies. Cedric nodded and looked at Rose. Rose, I presume you can observe over great distances as well. Yes, I can, but don't expect something too far away. Without my magic to help me handle the amount of useless information, I can't see that far, Rose said, waving her hand and explaining a bit about how her 6 eyes worked. Honestly, her sight could cover hundreds of kilometers if necessary, but the amount of information was so overwhelming that even after reaching enlightenment, she would find it difficult to handle such a large amount of information for more than a few minutes. Her brain simply couldn't process such a large amount of information, even with magical energy filtering out a good portion of it. In the end, she was human, and being human meant having limitations. If she were made of pure magical energy like a cursed spirit, she presumed she might be able to handle it since she could regenerate her brain as quickly as it decayed. Since I don't have an innate technique, I'm a wizard specializing in spells. I know almost all the spells from 1st to 7th year. I can basically perform any role. Cedric looked at Rose with surprise and spoke about himself with a very confident smile. Not being born with an innate technique, he always worked hard to learn spells. He didn't consider himself inferior to any wizard born with an innate technique. That's excellent, Asterion said. This was the only weak point for him and Rose. They hadn't had enough time to learn all the spells, they were only 14 years old. This was a natural gap that time would fill, but for now, having a teammate specialized in spells was something valuable. Then, Rose, Asterion, and Cedric all looked together at Luna, who was still playing with Baskerville, ignoring the discussion happening in front of her. The 3 exchanged glances and didn't ask anything about Luna. It was enough for the girl to see the future, which would help them enormously, as it had moments ago. It could be said that Luna would be the core of the team, while Rose and Asterion would be the attackers and Cedric would act as support. The only good thing was that no one besides them knew Luna was a seer. Otherwise, things would become complicated, and everyone would be even more determined to eliminate Hogwarts in the first phase. Chapter 132 The First Trial, 2. As Luna had foreseen with her gift, the next morning in the Great Hall, Dumbledore announced the first of the 3 trials of the International Magic and Wizardry Tournament to all participants. King's Game The King's Game was essentially a game focused on 2 phases. The first phase was the elimination round, where teams fought each other to reduce the number of rivals while attempting to reach the throne atop the mountain. The second phase was the most decisive, where all remaining teams would unite to fight against the sole team sitting on the throne. If they managed to make the king descend from the throne, the team was disqualified, allowing another to occupy the throne. The longer a team occupied the throne, the more points they would accumulate in the end. There were rules in the King's Game. The entire King's Game would last 3 days. Participants received a kit of food and utensils for use over 3 days. No fatal injuries. Mutilations and broken bones were allowed. Any use of alchemical items in the King's Game was prohibited. Misuse of these items would result in the disqualification of the entire team. Wands were allowed. Any outside help beyond the King's Game arena would result in immediate disqualification of the team. In other words, outside help was prohibited. Asterion, Rose, Cedric, and Luna were seated together at the Slytherin table, along with Hermione, Daphne, Doria, Tracy, Blaise, and Theodore. Waving his wand and casting a sound-muffling spell crafted by Snape, which prevented sound from propagating within a delimited space, Asterion looked at his teammates and spoke calmly. "We need to choose who will be our king. Whoever is chosen cannot descend from the throne, or will lose. I refuse. I want to fight, not sit still on some stupid throne." Rose was the first to decline. She entered the tournament for the battle. If she didn't fight, it would make no sense for her to be there. "I also decline. My talents will be better used on the battlefield." Cedric also declined, for a reason quite appropriate. "I too will decline. Rose and I will be the attackers and defenders." Asterion took a sip from his steaming cup of black coffee and drank the bitter liquid without hesitation. Setting the cup back on the saucer, all three looked directly at Luna, who was gazing around as if the air was more interesting than the conversation unfolding. "Luna will be our queen." Seeing the dreamy and distracted expression on the girl's face, Asterion sighed wearily and spoke with a helpless tone. Rose and Cedric naturally accepted. Although Luna's combat power could be questioned, she was not dead weight that would hold the rest of the team back. On the contrary, with her gift, she was the most important member of the team. It was decided, Luna would sit on the throne while Rose and Asterion acted as attackers and defenders, and Cedric would support the team, acting as a healer and using his spells for other tasks. "I have a strategy that would be suitable to use from the beginning of the game," Hermione spoke, capturing everyone's attention. Resting on her lap was a large, old book. Seeing the conversation shift to her, Hermione cleared her throat and spoke confidently, head held high. "The wolf in sheep's clothing." Without waiting for others' responses, she continued, "We can lure our enemies by showing a weak side to them and lead them into a trap, especially putting them in unfavorable terrain for them but favorable for us." Rose looked at her friend with a puzzled expression and couldn't help but smile. While it was a great idea, such a strategy wouldn't work. "Mione, maybe this would work if Asterion and I weren't on the team, but with us here, no matter what we do, we'll be seen as the strongest team. Any sign of weakness will be interpreted as a conspiracy against them." Hermione's face hardened at her friend's words. She lowered her head, disheartened, and whispered, "I'm sorry, I didn't think of it that way." "It's okay. Any idea can help us. Don't hesitate to speak just because you're embarrassed." Asterion nodded, comforting the brown-haired girl. Although Hermione's strategy might not work, it still helped others formulate different strategies based on it. Splitting up and attacking isn't smart. It will weaken the team and expose weak links to danger. Daphne gave her opinion after a brief silence. "But that's good for us. We can use the night to affect our enemies psychologically and try to separate the sheep from the wolves in a moment of nervousness. Not only would it save magical energy by not attacking directly, but it would also fragment the enemy team." When she finished speaking, Hermione and the others at the table couldn't help but look at Daphne with shocked expressions. Daphne's strategy was at the very least cruel and insidious. "It's just a game, do we really need to go so far as to psychologically torture?" Hermione spoke with a hint of defiance in her voice. To her, such cruel methods were unsuitable for a sports game. "Just a game. Theodore asked sarcastically. It's not just a game, Miss Granger. We're talking about the world's first international magic and wizardry tournament, and it's being hosted in our country. If we lose, it'll be a shame hard to forget. We have to win, no matter the cost. Beside Theodore, Blaise concluded. It was the typical mindset prevailing in Slytherin. Winning was always more important, regardless of the means used to achieve it. But this was for Slytherin, Hermione, and even Cedric hesitated to agree with such a strategy. Yet, considering what was at stake, their eyes grew determined. Theodore is right. Nodding to the young Slytherin sitting on his left, Cedric continued, we have to win, whatever it takes. Now you're talking like a Slytherin. Theodore smiled proudly, putting his arm around Cedric's neck. Cedric merely offered a weary smile at his words. If not for the tournament's significance, he definitely wouldn't use such a cruel strategy against their enemies. In comparison, he found Hermione to be a white, innocent rabbit, while Daphne was a snake hidden in the bushes, waiting for her prey to pass by and strike with deadly, cruel insidiousness. Seeing Cedric putting the school's interests above their own, Asterion nodded approvingly. The young man would make a good senator in due time, he just needed to become a bit more determined and cruel for the position. Breakfast continued with everyone sharing their ideas, presenting them one by one. Some were cruel, others too innocent, like Tracy suggesting seduction to lure other participants. This made everyone roll their eyes at the Slytherin girl. Though the strategy could work, it required having a Veela on the team, something they didn't have. Let's win. Cedric raised his juice-filled glass and toasted with a gentle smile. Let's win. Everyone echoed simultaneously, drinking from their respective glasses. Let the games begin. Sipping his coffee, Asterion thought, looking at Dumbledore at the teacher's table conversing cheerfully with the ministers of magic. As if sensing his gaze, Dumbledore turned and raised his glass towards Asterion, who returned the gesture with a cup of coffee instead of a glass. Honestly, Asterion didn't know what Dumbledore was thinking. The man had a mind more insidious than an entire nest of snakes. Their and Rose's participation in this tournament smelled of Dumbledore's conspiracy, especially with the main suspect being a member of Hogwarts Council. Robert Crouch. Asterion chewed on the name in his mouth, his eyes briefly gleaming with a cold light. Dumbledore had already warned that Robert was missing. He presumed the man was either dead or hiding, plotting something in the shadows. In any case, there was no better option. If the former, the man was killed to cover up traces of something bigger. If the latter, Robert was conspiring with someone or some unknown group. Asterion really disliked surprises. You never knew if they would bring good news or bad news. And when it involved him, the news mostly tended to be bad. Chapter 133 King's Game 1. In the Hogwarts tent, Asterion and Rose sat facing each other, an awkward silence hanging between them. Both wore thick, wide boots, black pants, and tight long-sleeved shirts, each piece of clothing bearing the crest of their respective houses. In Asterion's case, a green serpent, and in Rose's, a golden lion. At that moment, they were the only ones in the tent. Cedric and Luna had gone out to check on something and were not present. To be more precise, Cedric went to check on something, while Luna was probably off looking for strange magical creatures again. I heard from my fiancée that you were a bit too enthusiastic around her. Asterion broke the silence between them, his red eyes casually gazing at the white-haired girl in front of him. Rose struck a rather unladylike pose in her chair, almost lying down in the seat while staring upward with a sleepy look, apparently not used to waking up as early as today. With his words, Rose's blue eyes met the ruby red. She lifted her lips in a smile and spoke lazily. Maybe I want to steal Daphne from you, little star. You'll need something better than shortening your skirt, snowflake. Asterion crossed his legs and said sarcastically, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Honestly, even if Daphne felt physical attraction to Rose, Asterion didn't consider it betrayal on her part. The reason was very simple. Besides not minding two women kissing, he didn't even see Rose as a man. If this could be used to spice up their married life in the future, he wouldn't mind Daphne inviting another woman to their bed. Especially given that he himself had cheated on Daphne twice with Bellatrix. Other men might not agree with his opinion, but as he said, it all came down to opinion, and this was his. If other men had a different opinion, that wasn't his concern. Asterion didn't pay anyone's bills to have a say in their personal life. But if it were another man trying to seduce Daphne, it would be a completely different story. Baskerville would probably have a midnight snack to satisfy his hunger. Humph. Rose huffed at his sarcastic words and crossed her arms under her chest. I expected something more radical from you. Please, I'm not a barbarian. Asterion rolled his eyes and spoke calmly. He brought the wine glass given by Baskerville to his lips and took a sip. Looking at her, he spoke in a slightly serious tone. But avoid getting too close to my fiancée, she is mine, dear cousin. Having said that, he might not mind some occasional flirting from Rose, but that was it. If it continued frequently, he would have to have a private conversation with his cousin about personal space. However, looking at Rose's incomparably beautiful face, Asterion thought about Daphne's words. As she had said earlier, if he married Rose, all his plans would be much easier to accomplish in the future, not to mention that marrying Rose would come with the bonus of irritating Dumbledore to an unprecedented level. Just imagining Dumbledore full of rage at his wedding made Asterion feel that the idea of marrying Rose didn't seem so unbearable given the girl's sarcastic and arrogant personality. Rose, if you wanted so badly to climb into my bed, all you had to do was ask. I would have accepted you. Lifting his face with arrogance, Asterion joked in a playful tone. Rose's cheeks turned a rosy hue almost immediately. She hadn't expected Asterion to be so direct with his words. Seeing Rose acting all shy, something very rare, Asterion's lips curved into a teasing smile. He got up from his chair and moved dangerously close to her. Their noses touched while Asterion's lips were slightly apart from Rose's, just a centimeter away from touching. Their eyes met, and they stared at each other. The blush on Rose's cheeks disappeared as she realized she was being teased. Then, with a mix of anger, embarrassment, and a sense of revenge, and with classic teenage impulsivity, she closed the distance between their lips. Asterion didn't react until he felt a soft and obviously very inexperienced touch on his lips. You. Quickly separating his lips, he looked at Rose in surprise. He hadn't expected Rose to actually kiss him, he expected anything but such an abrupt kiss. Licking her lips, remembering the previous sensation, Rose smiled arrogantly, showing her teeth. Calming down, Asterion huffed coldly and said sarcastically, "That was the worst kiss I've ever felt." Rose felt as if an invisible arrow pierced her heart. Someone who's never kissed before would probably kiss better than you. Again, an imaginary arrow struck Rose. The smile on Rose's face stiffened at his words. She clenched her teeth and looked dangerously at Asterion. Her fist opened and closed constantly. Just as Rose was about to teach her dear cousin a lesson in humility, the tent curtain opened, and Luna entered. There were some leaves in her hair, and her clothes were slightly rumpled, showing that she had been in a forest just moments before. Biting into an apple, Luna's eyes wandered between Rose and Asterion, a touch of curiosity shining as she asked, "What are you two doing?" Swallowing the apple, she looked curiously at Rose's flushed cheeks. "Am I interrupting something?" she asked in her naturally slow and serene tone. "No, we were just discussing a few things." Sitting back down in the chair, Asterion looked seriously at Rose as if warning her not to speak and responded calmly. Seeing him act so calmly, Rose felt her fists itch to punch that smug face. She regretted giving her first kiss to Asterion. She was sure he would tease her for eternity, if he didn't tell Daphne, who would consequently tease her too. Cursing her momentary impulsiveness, she took a deep breath and sat back down in the chair, waiting patiently for the start of the king's game. Though her expression was somewhat cruel as she looked at Asterion. Luna blinked a few times and sat next to Asterion, looking not so discreetly at his shadow. The hundreds of eyes in Asterion's shadow retreated almost instantly under Luna's gaze. Seeing this, Luna opened her small carrot-shaped bag and took out a piece of raw meat. She extended her hand and tossed it toward Asterion's shadow. Baskerville, smelling the fresh blood, reluctantly emerged from the shadow and ate the meat midair. Taking another piece of meat from the bag, Luna waved it around as if calling the demonic dog. "Come get it, sweetie," she said softly, looking at the hundred-eyed dog. Hesitating for a moment, Baskerville blinked his hundreds of eyes and jumped onto Luna's lap, where she offered the piece of meat she was holding without hesitation. Watching the entire operation orchestrated to kidnap his companion, Asterion was speechless. Just as he was about to speak, Cedric entered the tent and spoke hurriedly. "It's starting." Everyone stood up and left the tent, and as they stepped outside, they were bombarded by an explosion of deafening applause. Looking at the packed Quidditch stadium, Asterion took a deep breath. Chapter 134 King's Game 2. The stadium had obviously been expanded numerous times to accommodate the sheer number of people within it. Asterion estimated that there were at least 100,000 people. They definitely weren't all from England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, and Northern Ireland. Even combining the entire population of the British Isles, it was impossible to reach such a staggering number of witches and wizards. Looking up, within the VIP seats of the Quidditch Stadium, were all the ministers of magic, the president of MACUSA, and, of course, Dumbledore. Honestly, in Asterion's eyes, they all looked like Roman emperors gazing down at the center of the Colosseum, waiting for their gladiators to kill each other in a cruel and sadistic battle. While he pondered, the Hogwarts team lined up near the other teams already in position. Glancing to the side, he observed the other teams and their captains. Leading the Durmstrang team was a tall boy with broad shoulders, black hair, and eyes that reminded him of a particular person, the Russian Minister of Magic, Dmitry Ivanov. Alexei Ivanov, captain of the Durmstrang team and son of the Russian magical prime minister. Leading the Beauxbatons team was a beautiful young blonde with blue eyes, wearing tight-fitting clothes that perfectly outlined her slender and elegant figure. Fleur Delacour, captain of the Beauxbatons team and daughter of the French Prime Minister. Looking at the other teams, Asterion was speechless, as most of the team captains were children or relatives of the ministers of magic seated in the VIP seats. While nepotism was particularly evident in this world due to innate techniques and the centralization of power in powerful families, such a grand display of nepotism was truly unprecedented. But he could understand what these ministers wanted by placing their children in the tournament. After all, if a particular country won, the Minister of Magic would probably gain a lot of prestige and, consequently, another 4-year term. Even if they couldn't win first place, they could still gain prestige with second and third places. Interests above all. Looking a bit more at the other captains, Asterion quickly lost interest. Except for the captains from Russia, France, the United States, Japan, and China, everyone seemed a bit weak in his eyes. But that was because he was a special grade wizard. To others, these captains were geniuses in their countries and worldwide. When the crowd quieted down, Albus Dumbledore, Mage Marshal of the Clock Tower, stood up from his seat and stood in front of what seemed to be a microphone but was obviously an alchemical item capable of amplifying the user's voice. He tapped the microphone twice, testing if it was working, and when he saw it was, he greeted everyone with a big smile. Good morning, everyone. I hope you are as excited as I am to witness such a special day as today. Although he knew that probably not everyone could understand him, after all, not everyone knew English, Dumbledore used some animated gestures to greet everyone as if he were greeting them all. Dumbledore's response came in a wave of excited screams and thunderous applause. Waiting for everyone to calm down, Dumbledore continued speaking with a smile. The King's game will last about 3 days and will be officially broadcast throughout the stadium, allowing everyone to watch without much difficulty. Seeing Dumbledore continuing his speech, the Russian Minister of Magic glanced at his old rival and spoke in English with a strong accent. Benjamin, let's make a bet. Raising an eyebrow, Benjamin looked distrustfully at the 2-meter-tall man. If there was one thing he had learned from politics, it was that trust was a double-edged sword. His friendship with Dmitri was similar. The man might seem sturdy and brainless, but he was a high-level snake. What do you propose? The president of Makusa asked, narrowing his eyes. Let's bet on who wins this trial. Ivanov looked with a smile at his old rival and spoke in a relaxed tone. His casual demeanor made Benjamin even more suspicious. This old bear had to be confident to bet against him. I bet on my son, Alexei. Unbothered by Benjamin's increasingly distrustful look, Ivanov spoke calmly. Still, despite all his distrust of Dmitri, Benjamin decided to place his faith in his son. The boy was better than him at everything and would definitely defeat Dmitri's son. I bet on my son, Michael. Benjamin said with unconditional confidence in his voice, which made Ivanov look at him strangely, but then the man smiled. If you're so confident, how about betting your island? Ivanov finally revealed his purpose, smiling so broadly his teeth shone. Benjamin's island had a great strategic position and, as a bonus, a huge mansion to comfortably spend holidays on. Humph! Snorting coldly, Benjamin retorted, revealing his purpose. I want your silver and copper mine in the Balkans. Ivanov's face twitched at Benjamin's words. He didn't expect this guy to dare have thoughts against his precious mine. That mine represented 30% of his entire estate's income. But remembering his son, Ivanov's smile returned to his previous confidence. Very well, I accept. Both foxes, confident in their sons, despite the presence of Asterion and Rose, looked at each other and smiled. As the bet between the Russian and American ministers was finalized, Dumbledore finally concluded his speech. "Let the games begin." This was naturally met with thunderous applause. Looking at all the young witches and wizards lined up side by side, Dumbledore's smile grew happy, and he spoke in a confident and charismatic tone. "Good luck to all the competitors, and may Merlin be with you." The young witches and wizards from the 12 countries felt as if they had been injected with energy at the man's words of good luck. In the stands, Narcissa, Andromeda, and a huge black dog stood side by side, watching the entire ceremony. "It's finally starting," Narcissa said, clapping her hands and looking at Asterion among the competitors with a proud smile. Although she didn't know how he was participating, it didn't stop her from feeling immense pride at that moment. She had no doubt that the Goblet of Fire would stay at Hogwarts this year. "Let's hope they win, right, Sirius?" Andromeda gently petted the huge black dog and spoke in a sweet and tender tone. The dog looked at Andromeda with a helpless expression, feeling her caresses, but remained in place, despite the mocking smile Narcissa was giving him. Chapter 135 King's Game 3. Cedric crouched on the ground, looking at the map in his hands. Beside him, Luna was also examining the map with curiosity. The map was extremely detailed, marking freshwater pools along with some paths through the forests, including particularly dangerous routes through the mountains. The Hufflepuff representative truly didn't know how much effort it took to create such a large setting in such a short time. Just the effort to keep the place invisible from the Muggle population was enormous, demonstrating the amount of work the clock tower attributed to the International Tournament of Magic and Witchcraft. "Where are we?" Cedric asked Rose, who had just jumped from a tree branch to the ground. "There's a mountain range to the west, a forest to the south, and a lake to the north," Rose said, landing gracefully on her toes. "This is simply huge. Professor McGonagall is amazing." Cedric sighed in admiration, something Rose deeply agreed with. If asked if she could destroy a city, Rose would answer yes, very easily. But if asked if she could create a city like this, the answer would be no. Creation takes time, while destruction happens in an instant. Rose represented this well. Based on Rose's words, Cedric located their position on the map and frowned. "We're in low terrain, we need to move to higher ground," he told his teammates, who nodded in agreement. The basics of warfare involve holding advantageous terrain. One reason wars could be prolonged was the use of trenches and mountains in world wars. Cedric looked at Asterion, who had his eyes closed, waiting patiently for him to finish his reconnaissance. Opening his eyes and revealing ruby-red orbs, Asterion spoke, his voice tinged with surprise, "There's no one within 10 kilometers around us." The environment used in the King's Game was simply enormous. Asterion estimated it to be about 200 to 500 kilometers, it was simply huge. He couldn't believe that Professor McGonagall had done all this by herself. If Minerva McGonagall had this power, she wouldn't be a semi-special grade witch but an special grade witch. However, remembering the amount of magical energy the woman possessed, Asterion knew that Professor McGonagall had not broken the most difficult barrier in the wizarding world to become England's 4th special grade witch. This meant that Dumbledore had helped Professor McGonagall, and even Professor Flitwick probably assisted, showcasing the monstrous achievements of the 3 Hogwarts members in Transfiguration. 3 days. That's the time limit for the King's Game and also the duration the entire arena used in the King's Game could stand. Hearing Asterion, Cedric circled their location on the map. We need to decide where to go, he said, looking at everyone around. The throne is probably at the highest point marked on the map, Rose said with a mischievous smile, pointing to the most prominent mountain on the map. Inevitably, everyone will head there. You want to ambush the other teams? Asterion immediately understood what Rose wanted to do, frowning. But there's too much area to cover around the mountain. There are 3 paths leading to the highest mountain, Cedric added, pointing to 3 routes marked on the map. One passed through the forest, another through a swamp, and a third through a mountain range. Besides other natural paths, they can bypass natural barriers like mountains and rivers by reinforcing their bodies with magic. In short, there are many paths a team can take, and we have too few people, making it impossible to cover everything, Asterion concluded with a thoughtful expression. If he could use all his magical energy, he could cover at least half of the entire arena, which would be enough to monitor all the places and paths someone could take. But he could only use the magical energy of a grade 2 wizard, leaving him powerless in this situation. Then ignore the less obvious paths and focus on the most obvious one. It doesn't matter if a team sits on the throne, we can remove them in the second phase. After all, they are weak. Every word of Rose was transmitted by a small bird on a branch, making the Hogwarts audience almost shout Rose's name together. Although people generally dislike arrogant individuals, they love a strong and arrogant character. Watching the confident and arrogant girl on one of the 4 screens in the Quidditch stadium, Sirius, in his animagus form, spoke nostalgically. She reminds me of James with a bit of Lily. James Potter was an idiot of the highest order, just like you, Sirius, Narcissa commented after hearing her cousin's words. She recalled the amount of trouble Sirius, James, and their 2 other friends, whom she didn't bother to remember, caused at Hogwarts. We were kids, Sissy. I was stupid and impulsive. I regret many of my actions, especially against Snape. Sirius spoke with a genuinely bitter and regretful tone. Sirius truly felt this way, but he didn't think Snape would ever forgive him because the weight of his pranks was all borne by others, with Snape being the most affected. After all, he was James's main target, all because of the love James had for Lily. As Narcissa was about to respond sarcastically once more, she heard a loud voice amidst the crowd's roars. Ants! Narcissa turned and found 3 girls making their way through the crowd, one with black hair, one with blonde hair, and one with red hair. Ophelia, Astoria, and Gina. Sirius looked at the girl with black hair and red eyes with a stunned expression. He used one of his paws to slap himself, feeling the pain, proving that the illusion in front of him was true. A child version of Bellatrix was standing before him. Remembering the hell he endured at the hands of Bellatrix as a child, Sirius's dog body shuddered. Unconsciously, he moved closer to Andromeda, who looked back at him with a puzzled expression on her face. Lady Narcissa, Astoria greeted the woman with a polite smile, emphasizing the word Narcissa instead of black. Astoria was not afraid of her future mother-in-law. In fact, she disliked the woman. She had tried to have a healthy relationship with her, but Narcissa did not share the same sentiments. If Narcissa didn't want a relationship between them, Astoria didn't bother trying to be friends with her. Gina simply shrunk back as the woman's cold blue eyes fell on her, breathing a sigh of relief when Narcissa's gaze shifted to her friend. Narcissa clearly sensed the subtle provocation in the future wife of her son's words and looked at the girl with a particularly cold gaze. She ignored the bold girl and focused her attention on the screen where Asterion appeared again. What a big dog, Ophelia exclaimed in surprise, looking at the black dog next to her aunt. She approached and petted the dog with a happy smile. What's his name, Aunt? Ophelia asked, lifting her head and looking at Andromeda. With a playful smile on her lips, Andromeda replied gently, Sirius. Who's a good boy? Ophelia continued to stroke the dog's head, speaking with a sweet and cheerful voice. Sirius pleaded desperately for help with his eyes to his cousins, but was met with playful and amused looks from them. Sirius just closed his eyes in despair and let himself be petted by the girl who resembled Bellatrix. Andromeda's body trembled as her shoulders shook uncontrollably. Her lips twisted as she watched the hilarious scene unfold before her. The teams from Beauxbatons and the Institute of Magic and Witchcraft in Florence have met. As Andromeda struggled not to burst into laughter, the voices of the people around them filled with excitement. Everyone immediately focused on screen number 3 and held their breath as they watched the imminent showdown. Chapter 136 King's Game 4. 3 young women and 1 young man sat in the trees, dressed in distinctive blue and gold outfits. Beauxbatons team captain Fleur Delacour looked over at her teammates, Sophie, Isabelle and Jean. Fleur's eyes focused on the only male student on the team. He had his eyes closed, his hands on the log they were on. Are you sure you found the other team? Unlike the soft and warm voice she had used with Asterion, her voice now was serious, calm, almost cold. Yes, I can hear their footsteps that way. Jean opened his eyes and pointed confidently south, but his gaze never fell on Fleur. The young man didn't want to be hypnotized by Fleur's charm in this competition. Get into formation and let's begin. Strengthening her legs with magical energy, Fleur's face turned cold. Without hesitation, she gathered strength in her legs and jumped onto the branch in front of her. The whole process was silent and graceful, no one would notice that someone was walking on the trees. Fleur's team nodded and followed their captain, moving like ghosts without making a sound. 5 kilometers away, Fleur's team was walking relatively fast, unaware that they were being pursued by students trained to be professional assassins. Let's stop. Walking without knowing where we are is foolish. One of the 2 male students, Matteo, spoke seriously. He felt that they were just wasting energy walking towards a relatively high hill. We need to reach higher ground to help us locate. Don't be a coward, Matteo. Valentina, one of the girls on the team, spoke, her voice not hiding the contempt she felt for her teammate. Matteo ignored her tone. As the son of non-magical parents, he was used to scornful looks and insulting words, especially when he was better than the children of powerful families in Italy. Matteo is right, Valentina. Stop being stupid right now. The Italian team captain, Giovanni, spoke calmly, his tone unquestionable. Valentina glared at the team captain, gritting her teeth but remaining silent. As the cousin of the Italian Prime Minister and the most powerful wizard on the team, Giovanni was a member of the famous Medici family, far more powerful than her Sforza family. Otherwise, with Valentina's explosive personality, she would have started a fight with Giovanni on the spot. Suddenly, Giovanni's twin sister, Francesca, felt a great danger in her senses and raised her head in shock, shouting loudly. There are enemies. After shouting, she quickly moved her body back and retreated. With incredible coordination with his twin sister, Giovanni also retreated almost immediately upon hearing Francesca's cry. But the warning came too late. The other two were not as alert as Giovanni and Francesca and only managed to draw their wands before the attack came. Fleur swooped straight down, her hair fluttering in the wind, and landed right between the members of the Italian team. A cold and deadly look flashed across her beautiful face as she unleashed her charm without any scruples. The Italian team only saw her beautiful blonde hair before their eyes focused on Fleur's face. At that moment, their thoughts slowed to a single thought. How beautiful! Fleur flicked her wrist, and a red spell shot from the tip of her wand, hitting Valentina directly and sending the young girl flying backwards, crashing into a tree with great force. She let out a painful groan and felt her head spin from the impact. At the same time, Fleur spun around and kicked Matteo with her magically energized leg, hitting him in the ribs. The sound of breaking bones echoed as the young man was thrown to the ground, clutching his ribs with a pained expression. Before Fleur could continue her attack, a huge wave of water washed over her. Instead of retreating as expected, she brandished her wand as if it were a sword and made an imaginary cutting motion. The wave of water split in half and spread out to the sides. At the same time, Fleur's body shot forward and almost immediately stood in front of Valentina, who had recovered from the previous surprise attack. Boom! Fleur's amplified punch hit Valentina's stomach hard. She spat out a large amount of saliva as she tried desperately to breathe. You filthy half-breed bitch! Kneeling and holding her stomach, Valentina's pale face contorted with pain and humiliation, but her response was met with Fleur's leg. Blood and teeth flew from her mouth from the impact of the kick. The last thing Valentina saw were Fleur's cold and indifferent blue eyes before darkness engulfed her consciousness. Turning to look at the battlefield, Fleur saw her three teammates surrounding the Medici twins. Remembering that France once had a queen from the Medici family, a sarcastic smile curved her lips. I really enjoy beating such a noble family, Fleur muttered, gracefully approaching the battlefield with her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. On a branch above her, a small bird was broadcasting the entire battle in real time. Fleur! 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 The entire audience was mesmerized by Fleur's strength, beauty, and cruelty. Cheers for the young half-blood echoed throughout the stadium, shaking the place. They could almost see a goddess of assassination descending from the heavens to destroy her enemies. If the crowd was cheering, the same could not be said for the Italian Minister of Magic. Valentino Ricci's face was completely somber at that moment, his green eyes glancing briefly at the French Minister of Magic before settling on Beauxbatons headmistress Olympe Maxime. You have trained your students masterfully, headmistress, he said through clenched teeth. The King's game had started less than an hour ago, but two of the Italian team members were injured and one was unconscious. As he watched his cousins being increasingly cornered by the four members of the French team, he knew that it would be difficult to win this trial. This would greatly affect the final outcome of the International Tournament of Magic and Witchcraft. Thank you for the compliment, Minister Ricci. My students have been training hard for today, Olympe replied, elegantly opening her fan as a gentle breeze brushed her face. A broad smile formed on the half-giant woman's lips. Olympe could already foresee a significant increase in enrollment next year due to Fleur's performance and the success of the French team. This filled her with extreme happiness, as she was almost certain that the French Supreme Court would allocate more funds to Beauxbatons next year. Louis Delacour looked at his daughter and smiled with satisfaction. He had always taught his daughter to defend herself in this dangerous world. To see Fleur fight like Athena, the goddess of war and wisdom, brought immense satisfaction to his heart. Chapter 137 King's Game 5. Giovanni and Francesca ran wildly through the forest, their faces pale, and Giovanni's arm visibly broken. As for their teammates, whether Giovanni or Francesca, neither had time to think while they fled, though cruelly abandoning them was the only option for the Florence team to stay in the first trial of the tournament. "Brother, we can't find another team in this state." Leaning against a tree, Francesca spoke between gasping breaths. There were many cuts on her clothes and body, some with blood oozing from the wounds. It was clear the French team had shown no mercy in their attacks when they ambushed them. Recalling Fleur, a shiver ran through Francesca's body. She never imagined someone so beautiful could be so cold and deadly, almost like a completely different person from the one she knew. Giovanni nodded, looking at his broken arm. If it were the second phase of the King's Game, they could ally with another team, but at this moment, it was impossible. This was the first phase, the elimination phase of the King's Game. If another team found them in this condition, there was no doubt they would be eliminated directly without even getting a chance to speak. "Sister, how much magical energy do you have left?" Giovanni asked, ignoring the agonizing pain in his arm every time he moved slightly. 30%, Francesca responded without hesitation, her voice tinged with seriousness and regret. During the ambush, they managed to escape after she cast a high-level spell, a fire spell that cost much of her magical energy. The spell had severely injured one of the French team members, giving them a chance to escape the ambush. As for whether the student was killed, it wasn't something she cared about, especially since they weren't disqualified at that moment. This showed that the student was at least partially fine. "Sister," just as Giovanni was about to speak, his expression changed drastically. Beside his sister, he saw an incredibly beautiful woman smiling coldly at him. Before he could say anything, his thoughts slowed and became confused. A smile appeared on Giovanni's face, and in his mind, there was only one person more important to him at that moment. Seeing her brother's expression, Francesca was confused and looked back. Her face turned even paler upon seeing the young blonde woman. She didn't try to run, not when a wand was at her neck. With a bitter look, she wanted to say something, but Fleur didn't give her the chance. Confundus. Brother midline horizontal ellipsis, it was Francesca's last thought before shadows consumed her consciousness. Seeing Francesca's unconscious body fall heavily to the ground, the smile on Fleur's face grew as she saw the fascinated look in Giovanni's eyes. "Can you help me, Giovanni?" Fleur spoke with a moving and pleading tone, her dazzling face causing Giovanni, enslaved by Fleur's charm, to become completely euphoric. He beat his chest forcefully and spoke in an excited tone full of loyalty. "Just tell me where to go, and I'll point my wand for you." Fleur's smile deepened. "Please, join your companions and prepare to fight alongside me against Asterion Black and Rose Potter." That was her plan, use the other teams as cannon fodder to exhaust Asterion and Rose. When both could no longer use the allowed amount of magical energy, she would appear and win. The only problem was that charming all the men wasn't so easy. The Florence team was a good example of this. Even though they weren't very strong, they still managed to severely injure her teammate. It showed how risky her plan was. Unfortunately, this was the only method for the French team to win the first trial of the tournament. There was no way they could face two special grade wizards head-on, even if those two were limited to using the power of a grade 2 wizard. As Fleur summarized her plan in her mind, her teammates arrived. The only male student on the team, Jean, didn't look well. From his shoulder to his arm, his skin was severely burned. If it weren't for a healing potion Jean had brought earlier, his entire arm might have been amputated by now. Seeing the unconscious Italian girl who had done this to him, Jean's face darkened instantly. As he was about to vent his anger by kicking the girl, he was stopped by Fleur. "Control yourself, Jean. You're in front of the audience." Her cold and indifferent voice made Jean clench his fists in frustration. He glared furiously at the unconscious girl but stepped back, visibly on the verge of exploding with rage. Giovanni's other teammate, Matteo Romano, seemed to be in the same state as Giovanni, enslaved by Fleur's charm. However, if one looked closely, they would see he didn't appear as hypnotized as his captain. Matteo, proficient in occlumency, was only pretending to be hypnotized while waiting for the right moment to stab the French witch in the back and make her plan fail completely. Looking discreetly at his captain, who seemed like an idiot madly in love, Matteo sighed sadly at how terrible a Veela's charm was. If a woman with 1/4 Veela blood had such a powerful charm, he didn't want to imagine how terrifying a pure-blood Veela would be. "Let's rest a bit and then start hunting other teams. We need more cannon fodder." Matteo listened carefully to Fleur's words and understood the French team's captain's plan. She wanted to use them to fight against someone. As for who that someone was, Matteo had already guessed. It was impossible not to guess when two giant mountains named Asterion Black and Rose Potter stood before all the teams. Although it was a cruel plan for those who were the cannon fodder, namely himself, Matteo still admired the strategy. Asterion and Rose had a limit to the amount of magical energy they were allowed to use. They would definitely be worn out fighting against numerous wizards. If they exceeded that limit, they would be disqualified directly, which was great news for all the remaining teams. Even if they didn't exceed the limit, they would still be very exhausted, which was also good news. There were no disadvantages to Fleur's plan, which is why Matteo admired the cruel plan orchestrated by the woman. The prettier the woman, the more dangerous she is. He never thought his mother's words would be so accurate at this moment. Fleur Delacour was a snake in sheep's clothing. Cruel, cold, and indifferent, she didn't mind enslaving others to achieve her goal. "When I marry, I should choose a woman with a normal appearance," Matteo thought, looking at the incredibly beautiful face of the woman. From that day on, he would never trust a beautiful woman in his life. Looking at the unconscious Francesca, Fleur thought about what to do with her. The other girl from the Florence team was still unconscious and would take a long time to wake up again, plus Fleur had taken her wand. Other than simple reinforcement, the girl couldn't cast any spells besides her innate technique. After thinking for a bit, Fleur did the same thing she did with the other girl. She took her wand and stored it, transfigured some chains, and tied the young girl to a tree. "Let's go." Watching with satisfaction her masterful work, Fleur spoke, reinforcing her legs with enhancement magic. Everyone, including Matteo and Giovanni, nodded and followed Fleur, disappearing quickly into the forest. Chapter 138 King's Game, 6. While the French team's conspiracy was quietly unfolding, Asterion, Rose, Cedric, and Luna seemed very relaxed at this moment, unlike many other teams in the King's Game. It wasn't that they lacked the competitive spirit against the other teams. But when you have the advantage, you just have to wait for things to work in your favor. Which was exactly what was happening at this moment. Asterion was merely waiting for the first phase to end so that Luna could sit on the throne while he, Rose, and Cedric would protect her. Suddenly, one of Asterion's observers transmitted the image of a team walking through a swampy path on the road leading to the highest mountain where the throne was located. Recognizing their appearance, he identified the team as the German team. Recalling the appearance of Germany in the Civil War, a cold smile appeared on Asterion's lips. "I've located the German team," Asterion said, catching everyone's attention, especially Rose, who looked extremely bored. "Where?" She stood up and asked with a wide smile on her lips. Her incredibly blue eyes sparkled for a moment. 10 kilometers to the north, Asterion replied without showing any signs of getting up. Although he wanted to vent on some punching bags, it was decided to save magical energy and protect the other team members, so only one of the two would attack at a time. "Me or you?" Rose asked, cracking her knuckles. She stretched comfortably. "I'll let you go first." Asterion closed his eyes again, returning his attention to the observers. He wanted to see if other teams were nearby. If there were, he would also attack, leaving Cedric to protect their team's queen. Rose nodded, and just as she was about to leave, she heard Asterion's voice behind her. "Don't go easy, Germany will be eliminated from the King's game." His cold and indifferent voice made Rose's lips curl into a crazy smile full of excitement. "Yes, my lord," she said playfully, reinforcing her leg with magical energy. But instead of heading directly to the German team, she went towards a relatively high mountain. Crossing the swamp, the German team didn't know they had already become prey to be hunted. The captain of the German team, Hans Weiss, the younger brother of the German Minister of Magic, Joseph Weiss, was a handsome and cheerful young man with blonde hair and blue eyes. He was tall and broad-shouldered, looking like the kind of guy most girls wanted to date. "Captain, there are no enemy teams within a 2-kilometer radius," said a girl with brown hair and green eyes. She used her innate wind-related technique to check for people around her team. "Thank you for your hard work, Greta." Hans smiled gently at the girl and refocused on the path ahead of him. Although he smiled, his eyes were incredibly serious. His innate technique was purely supportive, enhancing his senses to an incredible level. His ancestor could even see a few seconds ahead in time with their innate technique. Although he was far from reaching that level, he was still extremely sensitive to danger and gazes. At this moment, his senses tingled at the back of his neck like never before. He was being targeted by someone incredibly powerful. Hans just prayed to God that it was anyone but Asterion Black. His brother had already told him about the grudges between England and Germany. He knew that if Asterion Black found him, he would suffer cruelly at the opponent's hands. Suddenly, Hans abruptly stopped in his tracks, sweat running down his handsome face, a chill running through his body, and his hairs standing on end in the face of imminent danger. Hans looked up and saw only a blue and black malice emanating from a mountain peak several kilometers away. Focusing the magical energy in his eyes, Hans perfectly saw the mountain peak. His face turned pale, seeing those incredibly blue eyes looking directly at him. "Run! Everyone, spread out now!" Hans shouted before reinforcing his body to the maximum and darting in a random direction. The members of the German team were shocked by their captain's sudden roar, but no one questioned his orders. All 3 members shot off in different directions. Atop the mountain, seeing the ants fleeing, the manic smile on Rose's face grew. She crouched and reinforced her body with magic, her eyes sharpening as she aimed first at the weakest member of the German team. Boom! Rose's body shot down from the mountain, the entire peak sinking behind her as the sound of the kinetic wave spread throughout the arena. Karl never doubted his captain's orders for a moment. He ran as fast as he could, not conserving his magical energy at this moment. His body shot forward at inhuman speeds, crossing a distance of 100 meters in mere 3 seconds. Then, he heard a deafening sound echo in the sky. The next moment, a relatively tall figure with white hair appeared in front of him, the ground around them shattered and a crater formed about 5 meters wide. "You can't run away, little mice," Rose said, opening and closing her hand, her smile growing more excited as she looked at the semi-grade 2 wizard. Karl felt sweat dripping down his face as he saw the young woman. He finally understood why his captain had ordered them to flee as quickly as possible. They had the misfortune of encountering the Hogwarts team. "I'll give you a chance, attack with your strongest spell." Rose placed her hand behind her back and spoke casually, completely unconcerned with the enemy in front of her. The blatant contempt didn't make Karl furious, he felt it was natural for the young woman to behave that way. He was an ant that could be crushed at any moment, and she was an elephant. Drawing his wand, Karl pointed and flicked his wrist, shouting the most powerful spell he knew. Bombarda Maxima. He didn't hold back his magical energy, pouring everything he had left into the spell. His wand protested under the enormous strain, causing a large crack to appear along its length, but the spell was successfully cast. A red light shot out from the tip of his wand, illuminating the surroundings with a blinding glow. Boom! A deafening noise reverberated through the area, uprooting trees with the force of the explosion. Karl, still pointing his wand forward, was breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He had never used all his magical energy in his life, his legs felt like jelly, and he doubted he could stand much longer. As the smoke cleared, Karl's eyes widened in shock and horror. In front of him, Rose Potter still had her hands behind her back, smiling maliciously at him. "That was a good attack, little mouse," Rose said, slowly approaching Karl. With each step closer, the more terrified the member of the German team became. Karl backed away in fear but tripped and fell to the ground, eyes wide with shock. Suddenly, Karl's 4 limbs broke simultaneously. He looked at his broken limbs in horror and let out a painful roar. Arg har! Annoyed by the irritating sound, Rose lifted her leg and kicked Karl's head, rendering him unconscious. Seeing the unconscious boy, Rose whispered to herself, "I used more magical energy than necessary." Manipulating space with the magical energy limit of a grade 2 wizard is quite draining. No matter, 3 more to go. Looking towards the swamp, Rose's smile grew. "I'm coming, little mice." 139 King's Game, 7, hiding within the root of a tree, Greta Fischer, the vice-champion of the German team, took the opportunity to catch her breath and focused on using her innate ability to scan her surroundings. After checking everything within a 2-kilometer radius, Greta let out a disappointed sigh upon not detecting any of her teammates nearby. It had been about half an hour since they had all split up after Hans's shout. Greta wanted to see if anyone was close to her so she could regroup with her team. Wandering alone during the elimination phase was asking to be surrounded and attacked by a group. "Are you tired?" Hearing a concerned and pitying voice beside her, Greta responded instinctively. "I'm fine, and you?" Suddenly, she froze, her body going rigid. She was alone. Who had she just spoken to? Mechanically turning her head, Greta's eyes widened in horror as she saw the girl with white hair. She understood why her captain had ordered everyone to flee. The chances of her team confronting a special grade witch head-on and winning were practically non-existent. It was almost a consensus that all teams would devise a plan to exhaust the magical energy of both special grade witches before attacking them with full force. "I'm fine, thanks for your concern," Rose replied with a gentle smile on her face, her blue eyes looking at the brown-haired girl with green eyes. Taking a deep breath and calming herself, Greta asked calmly, "My teammates?" "Two are incapacitated, and it's just you and your captain left," Rose replied nonchalantly. For some reason, the fear in the girl's eyes made her a bit excited. She definitely felt she had been spending too much time with Asterion. Her cousin's sadism had rubbed off on her. Not that it was his fault. When she fought, she let herself go completely, becoming almost a lunatic for a good fight. Greta began to move away slightly as Rose spoke. "Want to run again?" Rose asked, noticing her movements almost immediately. Greta did not respond and drew her wand, a plan forming in the young woman's mind. She didn't believe that Rose had used her magical energy while fighting Carl and Lena, which meant the girl in front of her wasn't at full strength. Greta thought that if she fought Rose and further exhausted her magical energy, her captain, Hans, might have a better chance of winning after she was incapacitated like her teammates. A commendable choice. Your two companions made the same choice you did. I must say, all the magical schools have chosen their elites well for the international tournament. Everyone I've seen so far is very good. Rose nodded in satisfaction, seeing the young woman choose to fight her instead of fleeing. In her eyes, there was no point in a fight where the opponent didn't even have the mindset to win. Suddenly, Rose's eyes grew serious. She leaped into the air and spun, dodging earth spikes that had risen from the ground. Using one of the spikes as leverage, she propelled herself back into the air and spun 360 degrees, evading other spikes, but this time made of wood. Even knowing that her attacks would never harm Rose, Greta couldn't help but widen her eyes in amazement at how Rose avoided all her transfiguration spells so incredibly. Just how strong are her reflexes to dodge something like that? Greta thought, horrified by the 14-year-old's prowess. Transfiguration. I must say, I'm surprised, Rose said, sitting on a branch and swinging her legs back and forth with an excited smile, though to Greta, it looked more like the smile of a madwoman. Taking a deep breath, Greta didn't hold back her magical energy as she reinforced her body and assumed a fighting stance. This made Rose's eyes light up with excitement. All the other German team members had chosen to use spells rather than engage in hand-to-hand combat. Descending from the branch, Rose landed on the ground and assumed a fighting stance as well. Their eyes met with intense focus. The wind rustled the tree canopy, and when a leaf fell to the ground, they both moved simultaneously. The ground beneath them sank, and they appeared in front of each other. Greta lifted her leg and, with a high kick, aimed for Rose's head. The strong winds generated by the attack caused both girls' hair to whip violently. Rose firmly held onto her opponent's leg despite the powerful kick and punched towards the young woman's stomach. Suddenly, Rose saw Greta move like a serpent. Her body seemed boneless. Her head was trapped between two strong thighs, and she felt her center of gravity shift abruptly. In an instant, Rose found herself lying on the ground, looking up at the green eyes above her with surprise. A punch infused with powerful magical energy jolted Rose awake, and she quickly used her own thighs to ensnare the enemy's arm, effectively immobilizing her. Greta gritted her teeth, and despite the pain, she tried to bite Rose, but the girl returned to the position where the fight had started. Was it a spell that made your bones flexible? Rose asked curiously, gently touching her own face and feeling a slight pain around it. Greta's thighs, reinforced with magic, still caused her some pain, something even a true special grade witch had never managed to do. It could be said that this was the first time Rose had felt any pain in a fight. Creating new spells has always been something every country does and will continue to do forever. We're not like England, which is stuck in time. Taking a fighting stance, Greta responded, her eyes locked on Rose. There was unmistakable pride in the girl's tone. But what answered Greta wasn't words, but Rose's innate technique. Innate spell manipulation, unlimited, blue. As the swirling blue energy vortex formed just above Rose's finger, Greta felt an extremely powerful suction, and her body was pulled toward the white-haired girl. Firmly gripping Greta's neck, Rose intensified her hold and addressed the German girl's earlier words. "You're right, we're not very into creating new spells, especially in this century. But compared to that, our research field involving innate techniques is the best in the world. Every country has its weaknesses and strengths, that's just how life is." Her voice remained even and nonchalant, while her grip grew tighter, making Greta's vision blur and darkness gradually envelop her consciousness. "Captain, I fought as hard as I could against this monster, the rest is up to you." Midline horizontal ellipsis. This was Greta's last thought before darkness took over her awareness. Releasing Greta's unconscious body onto the ground, Rose sighed in relief and stretched comfortably. The German girl had caused more trouble than necessary, even managing to hurt her. "It seems I can't underestimate ants." Midline horizontal ellipsis. I hate to admit it, but Asterion is right, everyone will fight to the death when cornered, Rose murmured, as she lifted her foot and broke all four of the girl's limbs, preventing her from moving or effectively holding a wand. It might seem a bit cruel, and it was, but a healing potion could mend all the injuries without leaving any lasting effects, so Rose felt she had a clear conscience. 140 King's Game, 8, seeing the white-haired girl with incredibly blue eyes in front of him, Hans Weiss took a deep breath and resolutely drew his wand. He thanked God that it was Rose Potter and not Asterion Black. "You seem relieved to see me. Don't I scare you as much as Asterion?" Rose asked with an impassive face, observing the relieved expression on the German minister's brother's face. She had to admit. Seeing Hans's relieved expression irritated her more than she had expected. "Not at all, Lady Potter. It's just that I'd suffer more at the hands of Asterion Black," Hans replied with a dry laugh, but his eyes were hawk-like as they assessed the intensity of the aura emanating from Rose. He was relieved to see that she had less than 30% of her magical energy remaining. Hans estimated that Rose had hunted down his teammates before finally finding him, which greatly improved his situation at the moment. "You'll suffer less at my hands?" Rose murmured to herself with a puzzled look, then she laughed, bursting into a loud, maniacal laugh. "Ha ha 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 ha!" Raising her head and looking at Hans with a manic and extremely arrogant expression, she said, "Prepare to be beaten so badly that your mother won't recognize you." That look made Hans feel a shiver run down his spine. What kind of eyes were those? Crazy. Rose Potter was crazy. It was the only thing Hans could think as he looked at the smile and expression on her face. At that moment, he realized that encountering Asterion Black might be less painful than facing this teenager who seemed to have inhaled some very suspicious white powder. Hans barely had time to react when Rose appeared in front of him. He only managed to reinforce his body with magic before her fist struck his stomach with colossal force. Boom! Spitting out a large amount of saliva mixed with blood, Hans's body arched through the air and was thrown backward like a cannonball. Cough! Cough! Kneeling on the ground, holding his stomach, Hans coughed a few times and stood up, looking at Rose with a cold expression. "I'm going to enjoy beating you," he said, pointing his wand at Rose. In the next moment, more and more spells were cast within a few seconds. His innate technique was working at full capacity, and his senses reached a level he had never achieved before. Rose dodged all the spells, leaping from tree to tree with incredible speed. Her blue eyes remained fixed on the figure standing among the trees. She noticed something interesting. Hans wasn't letting her get too close with the amount of spells he was using, which made her realize that her enemy might not be good at hand-to-hand combat. But she wasn't in a hurry to prove her theories. Hans was a semi-grade 1 wizard, one of the most powerful in the tournament in her mind, along with a Russian boy and a French blonde. She planned to make him expend magical energy before finally taking down the defenseless lamb at the right moment. Seeing the fleeting shadow moving around in an utterly unpredictable manner, Hans tightened his grip on his wand. If it weren't for his enhanced senses at that moment, he wouldn't even be able to track the trajectory of the white-haired teenager. Rose Potter's control over her magical energy was something he had never seen in his life. She used tiny amounts of magical energy for reinforcement, significantly conserving her magical reserves. Unlike him, who was expending large amounts of magical energy, Hans realized that Rose wanted to drain his magical energy and then finish him off as a defenseless lamb. The worst part was that she was succeeding. He was wasting magical energy and couldn't stop, because if he did, he was sure that Rose would close the distance and force him into hand-to-hand combat, something he was definitely not good at. Grinding his teeth, Hans knew he couldn't keep falling into Rose's trap. He would be exhausted sooner or later, and at that moment, he would lose. He would do something he never thought he'd do, even in front of hundreds of thousands of wizards and witches. Taking a deep breath, Hans turned the ground within a 50-meter radius into mud and pointed his wand at the ground. In the next moment, boom, an explosion erupted. A large amount of mud was thrown into the air along with dirt and stones. Rose didn't care and shot towards Hans, her eyes locked on the young man. She reached out her hand towards his neck with the obvious intention of grabbing him. Then, to her astonishment, Hans met her gaze and pointed his wand at her. "Fiendfyre," he whispered, his face pale. The immense amount of energy drained by one of the strongest spells on the planet left his magical reserves nearly depleted. Rose's eyes widened as she sensed the tremendous danger. The world around her slowed down repeatedly. She could see, at the tip of the enemy's wand, the blue flame starting to be ejected toward her. She extended her hand toward Hans's wand, and her innate technique began to operate at unprecedented speed. His brain overloaded with the amount of information being processed so quickly. Asterisk boom. Asterisk in the next moment, a gigantic dragon of blue flames opened its mouth, attempting to swallow Rose whole. Innate spell manipulation, unlimited, red, Rose murmured, mere centimeters from the blue flames, her smile wilder than ever. Reality was distorted and manipulated as the space spiraled with red energy, tearing through everything in its path, pushing everything backward. The blue demonic fire was shattered and scattered around, burning the surrounding trees. Hans's eyes widened as he felt a red light pass in front of him. Agonizing pain caused his brain to halt for a moment. He looked to the side and saw half of his shoulder and his entire arm had vanished completely. His face paled in the face of the cruel reality. A large amount of blood spattered on the ground, staining the muddy soil. Breathing rapidly, Rose wiped the blood from her nose and smiled, beginning to laugh. This was it, she loved this sensation, the euphoria coursing through her veins in the face of danger. Ha 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 ha, she didn't care about the blue flames burning around her. She never expected an aunt who wasn't even a grade 1 wizard could put her in danger. Even though she hadn't activated Infinity to protect herself, what Hans had done was still impressive. Walking over to the still living Hans and grabbing him by his uniform, Rose quickly left the area. She was sure this place would turn into a complete blue hell in a few minutes. Leaving behind a forest burning with demonic blue flames, visible throughout the arena. With Rose's display of power, the English audience had no choice but to erupt into applause and excited cheers. It was impossible not to get thrilled, the entire first phase of the tournament had turned into a grand coliseum. Cruel, brutal, and bloody, everything that most people would never see was unfolding before them, which excited the audience in a rather strange way. But then, everyone fell silent. Rose and Hans's fight would likely be etched in everyone's hearts, including those sitting in the VIP seats. Joseph Weiss, the German Minister of Magic, in particular, couldn't help but clench his fists in fury at the deplorable and near-dead state of his younger brother. A high-level dark magic, Dmitry Ivanov, the Russian Minister of Magic, remarked with a sarcastic tone, looking at the German minister. "What are you implying with that, Ivanov?" Joseph asked coldly, his eyes icy and lethal as they locked onto Dmitry. Others might fear Ivanov because he was a special grade wizard, but Joseph was not afraid, not when he was also a special grade wizard. "Nothing, just being ironic," Dmitry replied sarcastically, giving a toothy grin. "Humph." Joseph snorted coldly and turned his gaze back to the big screen, wanting to know more about the condition of his younger brother. Chapter 141 King's Game, 9, Opening his eyes, Asterion looked at the distant forest burning with demonic blue flames. All the trees in that place were set ablaze, making the flames grow enormously and seem like they would consume everything. They looked as if they would reach the heavens at any moment. "In the name of Merlin, what happened there?" Cedric asked incredulously, staring at the distant forest burning in blue flames, his eyes wide open in extreme shock. "Did someone die?" Cedric turned and asked Luna, who was crouching on the ground, drawing what appeared to be a woman wearing a veil and holding a scythe with a stick. Her blue, almost ethereal silver eyes were completely focused on the drawing. Asterion looked at the drawing with a deep gaze and then looked away. For some reason, that drawing made him feel some unknown palpitations. "No one has died." Her words made Cedric's face look relieved, but his expression changed to one of helplessness with her next words. "Yet," she added with an innocent look, gazing at Cedric. Though she showed a mischievous smile on her lips, the young Hufflepuff could only let out a low, slightly sad laugh. When Cedric was about to ask more, Rose appeared suddenly, carrying 4 other people. She casually dropped the 4 members of the German team and let out a more than relieved sigh. She seemed relaxed and at ease, almost as if she had just unwound after a long period of stress. Looking at the condition of the 4 German team members on the ground, Cedric quickly approached and checked on them. His expression changed when he saw Hans's critical condition. He pulled out his wand and began chanting healing spells one after another. His skillful control of magical energy made Rose and Asterion look at him with surprised expressions. Cedric truly impressed them, but sensing the 20-year-old's magical energy reserves, they understood that less magical energy was easier to control. After half an hour of casting healing spells, Cedric, with a pale and exhausted face, sat on the ground, tired. He raised his eyes towards Rose and asked with a hint of dissatisfaction, "Was all this necessary?" Hans's condition looked terrible. With Cedric's treatment, his critical state stabilized, his wounds no longer bled, and he would survive, though with almost irreparable sequelae. In this international magic and witchcraft tournament, only death was not permitted, everything else was allowed. The situation only showed how brutal the upcoming challenges would be. Although, compared to the Triwizard Tournament, this tournament was still more harmless, as every edition of the Triwizard Tournament ended in deaths. "Do you think you would have survived that?" Rose didn't answer Cedric's question and pointed to the forest still burning with blue flames. From a distance, dragons, snakes, and firebirds could still be seen. It looked as if the fire was alive. Cedric paused for a moment and sighed, shaking his head. "Impossible, I would have died." He used high-level dark magic, so he must face the consequences. Rose leaned against a tree and replied in a relaxed tone. "A bunch of ants forced you into this state," Asterion, who had been silent, mocked Rose, making the white-haired girl grit her teeth in frustration. Although she knew she had underestimated the ants, she still didn't regret it. The fight was more interesting than she had expected. Unlike special grade wizards, who don't hold back their magical energy in attacks, one of the reasons for the absurd level of destruction by special grade wizards, low-level wizards must conserve their magical energy for emergencies. This was unusual for Rose, who rarely worried about magical energy due to her talent. "That guy is good, his innate technique involves heightened senses. If he were a special grade wizard, he would be a tough opponent." Pointing to Hans, now missing an arm and a good part of his shoulder, Rose spoke while clicking her tongue in admiration. It was the first time in her life that someone had managed to at least see her traces. Asterion nodded, though he didn't think Hans's senses were better than Neville Longbottom's. While the boy wasn't particularly strong against a special grade wizard, he was strong against grade 1 and lower wizards. Remembering Rose's state during the fight, he couldn't help but think how similar Rose and her male counterpart from another reality were. Both were particularly sarcastic in battles they would inevitably win, though in rare cases, both showed a serious demeanor. In short, it was a surprise to see Rose with a manic smile on her face, breaking limbs. Asterion had to admit, it was pure and wild brutality, which he found sexy. "How long would it take for you to recover your magical energy if you were a grade 2 wizard?" Asterion asked Rose, who was resting beside Luna. Asterion was not unaware of the other team's thoughts of exhausting them through many fights. It was the most obvious strategy when fighting someone very strong. But whether it was Rose or Asterion, neither would run out of magical energy. Their incomparable magical energy reserves were not something mere grade 2 wizards could deplete. They were only limited by a fixed amount of magical energy they could use. Exceeding this fixed amount would disqualify them from the tournament. However, both Rose and Asterion recovered more energy than they spent, creating something impossible in reality, a perpetual cycle of magical energy. 3 minutes. And you? After doing the calculations in her mind, Rose answered without hesitation. This was the regeneration rate of her magical energy when she was a grade 2 witch, which was when she was about 3 or 4 years old. 5 minutes, Asterion replied indifferently. He didn't have the absurd control over his magical energy that Rose did. At least not in the past. With his second innate technique, he could control his magical energy at the same level as Rose Potter. I located another team while you were gone. I'll wait for you to recover your magical energy before I start acting. Asterion said, warming up with a smile on his lips. It had been a long time since he fought as a grade 2 wizard, a stage he quickly surpassed, reaching grade 1. Asti. Hearing his nickname, Asterion's lips twitched as he saw almost silvery blue eyes looking at him deeply. Don't call me Asti, he said harshly, not caring about the girl's feelings. Yes, Asti. With a serious expression, Luna responded, saluting like a soldier. What did I say seconds ago? Asterion asked with a blank face. Luna put her finger to her lips and answered with a genuinely thoughtful expression. After a while, she remembered and replied seriously, not to call you Asti. What should you do then? Gritting his teeth, Asterion asked again. Not call you Asti, Asti. With an innocent look, Luna responded again. Asterion's expression was unreadable at this moment. He looked wordlessly at the innocent-looking girl. Rose in the background started laughing, hearing their conversation, especially Asterion's expression. Ahahahaha. Cedric turned his face to look at the tree as if it were something interesting, but his shoulders shook, indicating he was holding back from bursting into laughter like Rose. Sighing, Asterion surrendered. Do what you want, but what do you want to say? He's here, Luna said, making Asterion show a confused expression. Who's here? Cedric asked the question Asterion was about to ask, both looking strangely at Luna. Another seer has arrived. She replied casually, her voice indifferent to the arrival of the Dark Lord. Asterion remained silent. In the end, he didn't care about the arrival of Gellert Grindelwald. It was more than expected for the Dark Lord to come to Hogwarts, especially with the man's imminent plan about to be completed. Chapter 142 King's Game, 10. While Asterion didn't care about Grindelwald's arrival, others didn't think the same way. Hundreds of thousands of wizards and witches fell into complete silence, only the blinding flashes of cameras and the sound of the man's footsteps echoed throughout the place. Gellert Grindelwald walked with his loyal adopted son following behind him with leisurely steps. He wore a simple black German suit with a grey tie, his hair perfectly combed, while a gentle smile played on his lips. He looked like any kindly grandfather you might meet on the street, his charismatic aura emanating from his every gesture. However, one of his suit sleeves fluttered gently with his movements, revealing that he was missing one of his arms. The duel between Dumbledore and Grindelwald had a particularly costly consequence, the loss of one of the Dark Lord's limbs. Technically, Grindelwald should have died from Dumbledore's attack, but the seer sacrificed one of his arms to reshape reality and successfully survive the assault by the most powerful man in the world. Grindelwald walked over to the VIP seats and smiled gently at the 7 special grade wizards present. Sorry for the delay, the traffic these days is terrible, he said with a cheerful laugh, his silver eyes falling on Albus Dumbledore. I see you're healthy, Albus. Ignoring the murderous glares from the ministers of magic from various countries, especially France and Germany, Joseph Weiss and Louis Delacour practically exuded a cold-killing intent. Joseph, as a special-grade wizard, looked at Grindelwald with a cold, deadly stare, already gripping his wand, ready to fight the Dark Lord at any moment. No fights, gentlemen and ladies, let's not forget the hundreds of thousands of wizards and witches present right now. Seeing the imminent battle, Albus had to intervene. A fight among 7 special-grade wizards would easily kill almost everyone present without distinction. Although Dumbledore's words prevented the fight from starting, they didn't alleviate the heavy atmosphere. On the contrary, anyone could see that the environment felt like a volcano, and when it erupted, it would bring a great disaster to all of England. "What are you doing here, Dark Lord?" One of the few women who was a special-grade wizard, Ingrid Bergström, the Swedish Minister of Magic, spoke coldly, her aura so icy it lowered the surrounding temperature. "Ingrid, don't be angry, it wasn't anything personal." Transfiguring a chair to sit down, Grindelwald unbuttoned his suit and sat. His voice was gentle and warm. Hearing this, Ingrid's face became extremely cold, the hand gripping the arm of the chair tightened so much that the wood cracked under the pressure of her strength. "Ha ha ha," Ingrid laughed, her laugh full of veiled sarcasm. "It wasn't personal. 343 victims you killed," she shouted, her voice echoing throughout the Quidditch stadium, the aura of a special-grade wizard spreading ruthlessly through the surroundings. The 100,000 wizards and witches felt as if a mountain was pressing down on their shoulders, even breathing had become a privilege few could afford at that moment. The ministers of magic who were not special-grade wizards were the most affected, as they were seated next to Ingrid. The Italian Minister of Magic, in particular, was pale and had trouble breathing. He deeply regretted sitting next to this cold and cruel woman. Grindelwald did not care about the woman's emotional outburst, he smiled gently at her and responded in a very simple tone. "Where you see murder, I see martyrs. They will be remembered as heroes when this world is pure again." If Grindelwald had previously angered Ingrid, at this moment, the woman erupted from the purest fury. Innate spell manipulation, 100 Winters, Glacial Era. But before the spell could be successfully cast, the powerful hand of Dumbledore touched Ingrid's shoulder. Looking down at her, Dumbledore spoke in an authoritative tone, his eyes calm as they met hers. "Calm down, Ingrid, or I will ask you to leave." In the presence of the most powerful man in the world, Ingrid showed no fear, she shrugged off Dumbledore's hand and remained silent, fixing her eyes on the relaxed figure seated. As if feeling her gaze, Grindelwald waved at her amicably and turned his curiosity back to the 4 giant screens positioned around the Quidditch stadium. "England certainly has unique alchemical items," he commented, his chair intentionally placed next to Dumbledore's. His eyes focused on the screen showing the Hogwarts team, briefly settling on Luna before refocusing on Asterion and Rose. Turning to Dumbledore, he rested his head on his hand and spoke with a laugh. "Rose reminds me of you at her age, always so arrogant." "I wouldn't say the same, Asterion doesn't resemble you at all." Previously, he seemed like a block of ice. "Fortunately, the child has improved this year," Dumbledore rolled his eyes and commented casually, his smile not fading since he had sat next to Grindelwald. There was no responsibility, just the two of them chatting as they used to. There was no longer the most powerful man in the world or the fearsome Dark Lord. For a moment, it seemed as though they had returned to being simple boys that summer. Both of them laughed at their own words. "To what level did you restrict Asterion and Rose?" Grindelwald asked curiously. Grade 2, Dumbledore replied, looking at the two promising young wizards. He could see something happening between them but did not care, as it was part of his plan. Unknowingly, Rose had the role of making Asterion more human, something that young Daphne had been doing the previous year. This could be seen in the significant change in Asterion this year. The boy seemed more like a normal child for his age. What Dumbledore didn't know was that his successor was planning to marry Asterion, thereby uniting the factions and throwing away all his hard work of decades. You should have placed them at grade 3. Both are too strong, even if they are limited to using only grade 2 magical energy, Grindelwald commented casually. Midline horizontal ellipsis, Dumbledore simply nodded and continued watching the screen. Looking at the two talking amicably, all the ministers of magic showed strange expressions. Is it just me, or do Dumbledore and Grindelwald seem to know each other very well, maybe too well? The Brazilian Minister of Magic, Carlos de Silva Pereira, said with a curious tone, his eyes observing their close behavior with a slightly amused smile. Unlike other present ministers of magic, he held no grudge against Grindelwald, making him the only one who seemed relaxed in the presence of the Dark Lord. Hearing the Brazilian minister's ambiguous words, Benjamin and Dimitri exchanged glances and considered a possibility, but immediately shook their heads, dismissing it. It was such an absurd possibility that it would be tragically ironic. They were not in a fantasy book written by a woman desperate for money for something so ridiculous to occur. Chapter 143 King's Game, 11. Seeing that Rose had recovered her magical energy reserves, Asterion spoke while looking at Rose, who was leaning against the tree with her hands behind her head. I'm going. Don't stray too far from Cedric and Luna. Cedric, the poor boy, was still in shock from the news of the Dark Lord's arrival. On the other hand, Luna couldn't care less about Grindelwald. The delicate girl seemed to have more courage than Cedric, which made Asterion look at the Twilight vampire with slight disappointment. Even Edward Cullen had more bravery. Hearing Asterion's words, Rose opened her eyes and showed a displeased expression. From Asterion's words, it seemed like she was an irresponsible person who didn't know how to control herself. Don't kill anyone, Star Boy, she said in her sarcastic tone, her eyes looking at Asterion with an arrogant gaze. Humph. Asterion snorted and returned her sarcastic words. Do you think I'm like you? I'll be back in a few minutes, he finished, using his innate technique. Behind Asterion, a curtain of darkness formed, and a pair of claws widened the portal. 3 gigantic eyes emerged from the curtain. A cursed spirit, more terrifying than anything else, came out of the portal and fell to the ground. It looked like a centipede with claws instead of legs and 2 pairs of wings made of blood. Seeing the cursed spirit, Rose's face showed disgust. Did you have to choose the ugliest one? Now I can't eat anything. Cedric, beside her, nodded in agreement with Rose's words. The cursed spirit that Asterion summoned was indeed ugly and grotesque. Who's the cutest boy? Hearing the ethereal feminine voice, the lips of Rose, Asterion, and Cedric twisted abnormally. The sight of Luna petting the head of the cursed spirit was really hard to watch. You call that cute? I think there's something wrong with your concept of aesthetics, Rose commented, observing the infernal scene in front of her. Although she knew the peculiar girl was born missing a few screws, she didn't expect it to be at this level. You all judge by the cover, you have to read the content to understand, Luna replied, pouting at Rose's words and continuing to pet the cursed spirit. The cursed spirit itself seemed uncomfortable with the girl's caress, squirming uncomfortably while letting out some grunts. Pushing the pale-haired girl aside, Asterion climbed onto the cursed spirit. Without even waiting for his order, the cursed spirit flew upward, afraid of the strange girl. "Cutie," Luna said, raising her hand in the air, looking sadly at the cursed spirit that was getting farther and farther away from her sight. Rose's face twitched for a moment, seeing the longing and regret on the delicate face of the Ravenclaw girl. "What a strange team I'm part of," Cedric whispered to himself. Sometimes he thought he was the only normal person on this team. Even Asterion, who seemed the most normal, was odd in his eyes, not to mention Rose and Luna, both of whom were at the very least chaotic. Sighing again, Cedric focused on healing the members of the German team. Although Han's condition had stabilized, he wanted to do his best to reduce future sequelae. Meanwhile, in the sky, Asterion flew at a relatively high altitude, but it was enough for anyone in the arena to see him clearly. As for this, he was not worried. If possible, he wanted everyone to follow him and start attacking him, saving him time. Unfortunately, after some time observing, there was no sign of any team following his obvious trail in the blue sky. On the contrary, everyone seemed to be hiding, their gazes looking at him from the darkness, watching him, looking for a weakness or any clue they could use against him. This made him snort, but he didn't care and continued his flight, disappearing from the view of those teams. "Let's leave the area immediately." Fleur stood up from the bushes she was hiding in and gave the order. Her teammates and the people enslaved by her charm nodded and quickly left the area, afraid that Asterion might come again. Fleur's face was more dignified than ever. Even though she hadn't personally seen Rose Potter's fight with another unknown team, she saw the forest burning in blue flames from afar. The heatwave reached her, showing how terrifying that spell was. She had to reevaluate her plans and prepare to fight against Rose and Asterion. Even limited to using grade 2 strength, both were ultimately special grade wizards, the pinnacle of power in the wizarding world. A level she aspired to reach when she grew older. She had trained hard for this and would continue to train, not just for herself but for her family. The wizarding world was becoming increasingly dangerous, and to protect those who mattered to her, she would need the strength of a special grade wizard. Sighing, Fleur glanced at the people she had enslaved with her charm, her eyes falling on Matteo Romano, one of the members of the Italian team she had defeated. Having enslaved people all her life with her charm, she knew exactly how a person fascinated by her behaved. Although Matteo was doing a good job acting, the pretense did not escape her sharp eyes. Fleur was surprised that he had broken free from her charm, but after looking into his deep eyes, like two dark wells, she understood that the young man had mastered occlumency, effectively warding off her charm with the mental arts of magic. The captain of the French team did not immediately attack Matteo. On the contrary, Fleur pretended that everything was normal and continued with this act. She would let him think he was deceiving her, and when the right moment came, she would let him be a suitable pawn when she sacrificed him. Poor Matteo, thinking he was hiding well enough, didn't know that his entire act was nothing more than a bad joke in the eyes of the terrifying woman that Fleur Delacour was. Looking at his friend and captain being enslaved by the wicked witch, Matteo wanted to show some expression of pity or even try to wake Giovanni, but after thinking for a moment, he didn't. The chances of him being caught were more than high. There was no reason to believe that Giovanni would understand the situation immediately upon waking and act as he did. He wasn't talking about half an hour for him to adjust after waking up, but less than a second. Who could analyze a situation in such a short period? Therefore, Matteo just watched his friend being enslaved, unable to do anything to help him. His eyes fell on Fleur Delacour, the most beautiful woman he had ever seen in his life, but also the most frightening he had ever encountered. It can be said that seeing Fleur enslaving every man they met sent a shiver down his spine every time he witnessed the terrifying sight. Fleur Delacour, the Witch of Seduction. Matteo felt that the epithet given to Fleur was nothing more than fitting. Meanwhile, in the sky, Asterion had spotted his primary targets. The Spanish team. Chapter 144 King's Game, 12, Asterion didn't hide his aura or the aura of the cursed spirit. He wouldn't do like Rose, wasting so much magical energy reinforcing his body when it wasn't necessary. He preferred something more old-fashioned, making a grand but imposing entrance. Because of this, the Spanish team had also spotted Asterion and his cursed spirit from kilometers away. Seeing the enormous cursed spirit, about 15 meters tall and so hideous it was hard to look at, the faces of the 4 members of the Spanish team turned grim in an instant. Everyone, get into formation. Don't attack, focus entirely on defense, commanded Ana Rodriguez, the captain of the Spanish team, a student with non-magical parents, as she took a fighting stance. She had brown hair and blue eyes, her ordinary face showing a resolute expression. A thin drop of sweat rolled down her face as she watched the cursed spirit get closer to her location. There was no way to escape. The enemy on the other side could fly, and if they separated, they would be weakened, allowing Asterion to eliminate them one by one. For this reason, Anna didn't order the entire team to flee like Hans Weiss, the captain of the German team. Landing softly on the ground, the cursed spirit, shaped like a centipede but with claws instead of legs, looked at the 4 members of the Spanish team with its 3 eyes. Asterion descended from the cursed spirit and calmly brushed the dust off his clothes, his eyes never once focusing on the team in front of him, something that certainly didn't please anyone. To those watching or to the Spanish team itself, it might seem like he was showing disdain for the team, but Asterion simply disliked dirt, especially on himself. He cleaned the dust off his clothes before starting to fight. After all, if he was going to fight, he had to do it with elegance. The blatant disregard almost made one of the Spanish team members charge forward to fight Asterion. Ana glared at Carlos furiously and grabbed his shoulders, stopping the young man from rushing toward Asterion. Control yourself, Carlos. He's doing this on purpose. He wants you to get angry. But that bastard, Carlos didn't finish speaking as he felt a chill run through his body. He looked up and saw the cold eyes staring at him, and behind the seemingly calm gaze, there was a faint murderous intent. Asterion Carlos wasn't the only one who sensed Asterion's murderous intent. Ana flinched for a moment and recalled the circumstances of Asterion Black's birth. Her face darkened somewhat, realizing her teammate had just called an English special grade sorcerer a bastard, someone who cared greatly about the circumstances of his birth. Carlos spoke impulsively, Your Excellency. He didn't mean to offend your noble mother and father, Ana said in a dry but very sincere tone of apology, while nudging Carlos's ribs with her elbow. Losing didn't matter anymore at this point, she just wanted to suffer less at the hands of the very handsome young man in front of her. Carlos, hearing his captain's voice, finally realized what he had just done. The information about Asterion Black wasn't a secret, every country had investigated and kept their own files on extremely dangerous people, and Asterion Black was one of those people. Asterion, who was about to teach the young man a rather painful lesson, looked at the woman with interest. He looked at her for a moment and nodded. Very well, I'll forgive your offense. When Asterion spoke, it was like an angel saving Anna and Carlos's sanity, but their hearts sank when they heard his next words. But, Asterion smiled and continued, you'll still be my training dummies for a while. Behind Asterion, the cursed spirit moved its hundreds of claws and opened its mouth full of teeth, letting out a beastly roar. Roar! A bitter expression appeared on the faces of the 4 members of the Spanish team, but no one backed down. They reformed their formation, the 3 protecting a girl with black hair and brown eyes in the middle. They all drew their wands and were ready to fight at any moment. They didn't want to return to their country as cowards, their names would be dragged through the mud, and everyone would remember them as those who fled instead of fought, even if it was a hopeless battle. Seeing that no one fled, Asterion showed a slightly disappointed expression. Although he thought Rose wasted too much energy on mere ants, he found the idea of chasing and hunting them one by one quite appealing. Drawing his wand, which had a cursed spirit core specially made by him, Asterion pointed it at the enemies. Stupefy. A spell shot from the tip of Asterion's wand, and a red flash flew toward the enemy team. Protego. Anna quickly conjured a transparent shield, repelling the attack. Seeing this, Asterion shook his head. Instead of dodging, you used your magical energy to conjure a protego. Not very smart. His eyes looked at Anna with slight disappointment. Anna gritted her teeth in anger, hearing the instructive tone in Asterion's voice. Didn't he know that something like this was gained through experience over the years? She was 18 and had only fought with students her age, besides doing missions against cursed spirits. Although she was a civilian genius with great talent, she was still an 18-year-old girl. What should I expect from someone so weak? What a disappointment. Rose really hit the jackpot fighting the German team, Asterion murmured to himself, returning to his cold and disinterested expression. He had hoped for a fight like Rose and Hans, but he was disappointed in the end. His words, though whispered, were very audible to everyone present in this particularly quiet forest. Carlos, who already had trouble controlling his anger, clenched his teeth and didn't care about anything else. He reinforced his body and forgot his orders. In the next second, he shot forward, appearing almost instantly beside Asterion. He aimed a kick at the special grade sorcerer's ribs. Idiot! Anna wanted to strangle Carlos at that moment. Although Asterion's words made her extremely angry, she didn't let them shake her. Her teammates were like her, unfortunately, Carlos was an exception. Grabbing Carlos's leg by the ankle, Asterion smiled maliciously. With his fist reinforced with magical energy, he struck the Spanish boy's stomach. You need to learn to control your anger, Asterion said calmly. Carlos's eyes widened, and he spat out a tremendous amount of saliva into the air before being thrown back like a cannonball, hitting a tree brutally and falling unconscious the next moment. One down, Asterion casually commented, looking at the 3 remaining members of the Spanish team. Shall we continue to dance? He asked, approaching with his wand in hand. Chapter 145 King's Game 13, ricocheting a spell with his wand, Asterion was already beginning to feel bored. The Spanish team was disappointing in every way, except for the team captain. The rest of the members were at best considered mediocre in his eyes. When he was about to end the game and return to his team, Asterion stopped, looked at Anna, and smiled as he saw lightning surrounding her figure. Finally, Something interesting, he whispered, his red eyes narrowing with an intrigued look. Anna, feeling that her team was going to lose in a disgraceful manner, stopped thinking about conserving magical energy and used her innate technique. She didn't want to return to her country in such a humiliating way. Innate spell manipulation, Princess of White Thunder, negative lightning manipulation, Anna murmured. Her body was covered in white and blue lightning, her hair stood on end, and her gaze became extremely sharp. The air around her crackled violently. Fush! Anna disappeared from where she was and almost instantly reappeared behind Asterion, her hand covered in lightning reaching for the neck of the special grade sorcerer. But what happened next made Anna's eyes widen to the extreme. Asterion dodged the attack, and as Anna's figure passed by him, he charged his fist with magical energy and showed no mercy just because Anna was a woman. His fist struck the young woman's back without hesitation. Anna fell to her knees, her expression filled with pain. She breathed heavily as she looked at Asterion in disbelief. She felt some of her bones break, and a shortness of breath struck her, preventing her from breathing normally. She might not have been confident when it came to strength and power, but when it came to speed, she dared to say that even first-grade sorcerers couldn't come close to the speed she could reach. But in front of this 14-year-old boy, she felt useless, the same feeling she had while watching helplessly as a cursed spirit devoured her mother before her eyes. It was a feeling she had sworn never to experience again, yet here she was, kneeling and feeling like a piece of trash for losing to someone much younger than her. But Anna didn't have more time to reflect on what had just happened. She felt a strong, agonizing pain in her head, her brain seemed to tremble, and her vision blurred and doubled. Asterion had kicked Anna in the face with an indifferent expression, but Anna didn't fall unconscious. She activated her innate technique once more and retreated, holding her head, her expression pained as she looked at Asterion with a determined gaze. The smell of ozone lingered in the air as lightning crackled around the body of the Spanish team captain. In her hands, lightning danced like serpents as her hair stood up in the air. Asterion showed an intrigued look. This was indeed a good innate technique. If Anna were a special grade witch, he would have treated her with caution. Her speed would certainly be surprising. As Asterion was thinking, Anna moved. The lightning in her hands transformed into two short swords, the crackling sound reverberating around. Feeling the lightning in her hands trying to get out of her control, Anna's eyes became focused. Manipulating lightning was not the easiest task, especially with such a volatile element. Exhaling warm air from her mouth, Anna took an attacking stance and pointed at Asterion, who seemed genuinely interested in her next moves. She didn't want to admit it, but that expression of interest on her enemy's face left a bitter taste in her mouth. It was as if he hadn't considered her an enemy in the first place. "Since you don't consider me a worthy enemy, I'll make you see me as one," Anna said, looking at Asterion, her eyes filled with a determination that surprised the black air. "Then show me, don't hold back, come at me with the intent to kill." Asterion responded to her words with a smile, his voice tinged with a touch of appreciation and interest. When Asterion said this, Anna suddenly raised her head, and the ground around her cracked and sank. "Don't spare any magical energy, release it all and don't stop," Anna thought. Just as she was about to attack, she felt her magical energy start to rise and expand uncontrollably. Her innate technique subtly changed, and her power increased. The sounds of thunder reverberated deafeningly above the sky, black clouds condensed, shining with serpents of electricity swimming within them. "Congratulations, you're now a grade 1 witch," Asterion said, a black pentagram appearing in his eyes, his gaze entirely focused on Anna's ascension. It was the first time he had seen someone advance in level besides himself. He hadn't figured out the mystery of advancement when he was a child, but this time was different. His second innate technique made him realize that what Salazar Slytherin and Rowena Ravenclaw theorized might be very real, particularly the existence of planes overlapping the real world or even the plane where all magic originated. In his eyes, Anna, using her innate technique as an anchor, deepened her connection with this mysterious existential plane, allowing her to advance in level and reach grade 1. Fascinating. Can I use this existential plane to achieve my ambition? Asterion thought excitedly. At that moment, he only wanted to finish this tournament as quickly as possible and lock himself in his basement to study the information being transmitted by his second innate technique. Unfortunately, he couldn't leave the tournament at that moment. Losing his magic was completely unacceptable. He would rather die than lose his magic. Boom. A sound reverberated across the sky, and Anna, who heard Asterion's words, knew she had advanced to a level that few ever reached in life. Grade 1 Witch. She was 19 years old, and considering it, the chance of her reaching special grade was about 15%. If she managed to reach the peak of grade 1 before the age of 30, that rate would increase to an impressive 30%. It might seem low to many people, but compared to the rest of the witches and wizards in the world who had almost no chance of reaching special grade, it was an incredibly high rate. Not everyone was a monster like Rose and Asterion, becoming special grade while still teenagers. Asterion summoned his armor, finally taking the Spanish team captain a bit more seriously. The red eyes on the armor seemed alive, moving and blinking, making anyone feel a profound fear just by looking at them. Anna, looking at the terrifying armor, clenched her fists, feeling a sense of strength and satisfaction bubbling in her chest. She finally felt confident again. Dispersing her lightning swords, Anna waved her hand, and a pillar of lightning fell where Asterion stood. Asterion easily dodged the attack, but the terrain within 20 meters wasn't as fortunate. The ground sank at least 3 meters and shattered into countless pieces. A burnt smell lingered in the air, mixing with the scent of ozone. "Did I do that?" Anna murmured, seeing the aftermath of her attack. She hadn't used much strength, it was just a casual strike, but that casual strike was stronger than any attack she had made before. Before Anna could process it, Asterion appeared in front of her and punched her with his fist covered in black gauntlets. Anna only had time to reinforce her body and raise her arms before the impact came. Boom. Feeling the impact, Anna was sent flying backward but quickly balanced herself in the air and slid on the ground, leaving trails where she landed. Anna was shocked by her reflexes and resilience. She finally understood why Asterion could dodge her attacks so easily. This kind of reflex was no different from a mysterious sixth sense, making the world around him seem slower than normal. If she was like this, Anna couldn't imagine how absurd the reflexes of special grade witches and wizards were. Probably, to any outsider, watching a fight of special grade would be no different from seeing nothing. They would be so fast that the human eye couldn't successfully capture their figures. Activating her innate technique to the fullest, Anna felt confident about facing Asterion or at least not getting beaten as badly as before. Chapter 146 Second Phase of the King's Game, 1, 19 years old, Grade 1, for a Muggle-born, she's very talented. Grindelwald remarked, watching the girl ascend through the levels under the eyes of hundreds of thousands of witches and wizards. Anna's talent was truly surprising. Many Muggleborns would never reach her level, even if they trained their whole lives. Even among noble houses, Anna had remarkable talent. Any special soul is talented in its own right. Her being Muggleborn only makes her more special. Dumbledore replied to his rival's words with a calm tone, subtly catching the disdain in the Dark Lord's voice. "Do you believe what you're saying?" Grindelwald looked at Dumbledore with his silver eyes and asked, his voice tinged with a hint of sarcasm. He knew his old enemy's ideas all too well, a world where everyone had a chance to be whatever they wanted. If all witches and wizards were talented, then the power rankings that defined the foundations of the wizarding world wouldn't matter. Everyone would be a powerful figure. Unfortunately, the world wasn't a beautiful fairy tale filled with justice. It was cruel, cold, and ruthless. Talent was determined at birth, with a touch of luck and destiny. People like Ana Rodriguez, born to Muggle parents, were rare. The world always had been and always would be controlled by powerful families. One or two talented individuals could never influence society as a whole, something Dumbledore had always wanted to do throughout his life, but in the end, he never came close to achieving. Look at the faces of those children in the stands, their eyes shine with the hope of one day reaching a similar level. It's something beautiful to observe, the ideals of young people full of life and inspiration to change the world, Dumbledore said, his blue eyes looking at the children in the stands with a gentle smile on his lips. Always naive, Albus. However, Grindelwald did not share a similar vision to Dumbledore's. He looked at the children with a cold and composed gaze. If they don't learn they have limits while studying, the world will teach them in the cruelest way, killing them without any pity or mercy. At that moment, their dreams, desires, and aspirations will mean absolutely nothing in the face of death. Always so pessimistic, Gellert. Dumbledore returned the words to his former lover, speaking with a look full of determination. Even if the world teaches them they have limits, there is nothing more rewarding than seeing these children trying to surpass those limits. He continued, looking directly into the silver eyes of the infamous Dark Lord. Their pain, their tears, their sweat, their love, their desires, and their efforts, it's through the stumbles you make along life's path that you mature. A child cannot grow up with their parents by their side, they have to live for themselves to truly understand what life is, even if it is a hard life full of effort. Grindelwald couldn't help but get lost in those eyes for a moment. He hated those eyes, eyes that could make the impossible a reality. The same eyes that had made him fall in love with the man before him. "I hate it when you say things like that," Grindelwald murmured just loud enough for Dumbledore to hear. Dumbledore rolled his eyes and looked wordlessly at his former lover and longtime rival. That expression reminded him of when they had met that summer. All the ministers heard Dumbledore's words, and many agreed with his vision. The Russian Minister of Magic, Dmitry Ivanov, in particular, remembered his past. As the son of an important family in decline, it was only when his parents died that Dmitry understood how heavy the burden his father and mother carried was. He grew up despite assassination attempts from his cousins and uncles, maturing along the way with love and hardship. Dmitry couldn't help but show a nostalgic smile. Those were really difficult times, but when he looked back and saw what he had gone through to become who he was today, he never regretted his choices, even the wrong ones. It was the wrong ones that made him mature, not the right ones. Only when you err can you try to improve. You look like a nostalgic girl, Dmitry. What a shame for a man of your stature, Benjamin, sitting next to him, said with a sarcastic tone. Humph. Dimitri looked at his rival and scoffed loudly, his voice tinged with superiority. Only you Americans think emotions are a woman's thing. Dimitri's sharp words only made Benjamin smile sarcastically. I believe a man who doesn't cry becomes stronger. We're not women to go around crying. While Dimitri's words made the women present happy, Benjamin's words made them look at him in a decidedly unfriendly manner. Louis Delacour, seeing this, pursed his lips, finally understanding why Benjamin's wife had been seduced by the Russian Minister of Magic. With a husband like Benjamin, the woman probably lived under a lot of pressure and stress. When a kind man with an extremely high EQ like Dmitri Ivanov came along, he easily opened the door to the heart of the American Minister of Magic's wife. Watching the two still arguing, Louis turned his gaze to the screen showing his daughter. He couldn't have been prouder at that moment. Beauty, intelligence, determination, and power, his daughter had all the qualities to be remembered in the annals of French history as one of the most powerful witches. However, to gain fame and become renowned, she had to face two extremely talented opponents, Rose Potter and Asterion Black. May Merlin bless you, my daughter, Louise whispered inaudibly, focusing on the screen. While the discussion continued outside, Asterion and Anna were engaged in an intense battle. Asterion, using only his armor and gauntlets, constantly pressured Anna with his obviously superior physical strength. Each punch broke the sound barrier, causing the air to tremble and compress with each blow, forcing Anna to retreat to avoid being hit. Despite her efforts, her body was covered in purple bruises, especially on her face, where Asterion's fists landed repeatedly, despite her repeated defensive attempts. But Anna didn't just stand there taking hits, she retaliated with powerful electric currents as big as houses, hitting her opponent squarely. However, unlike what she expected, aside from a few scratches and a small scorch mark on his chin, there were hardly any visible injuries on the special grade wizard. This frustrated her more than the injuries she was receiving. Nothing was more painful than having her attacks be ineffective against her opponent. Ana Rodriguez didn't know, but Asterion wasn't as calm as he appeared at that moment. The Spanish girl's innate technique was truly powerful, especially after advancing to Grade 1, making her attack power superior to many Grade 1 wizards. If he weren't constantly reinforcing his body, some of his blood would have spilled on the ground at times when Anna perfectly timed her attacks and struck with ferocity. As for the loss of magical energy, Asterion wasn't too worried about this aspect. Both he and Rose were almost infinite generators of magical energy. It would be tough for him to run out of magical energy during a fight. However, since he was limited to using the power of a Grade 2 wizard, he was also limited in how much magical energy he could regenerate. But as Asterion was almost supernaturally controlling his magical energy expenditure, he was regenerating his energy almost sublimely, something he shamelessly copied from Rose. After all, with Rose as a base, he just had to change the mold and adjust a few things subtly to suit his body. Dodging a lightning bolt the size and thickness of a house, Asterion decided to take the fight a bit more seriously. Innate spell manipulation, creation and manipulation of cursed spirits, summoning. Raising his finger, a black vortex of pure darkness formed just above it, the size of a house, spinning like a black hole that even absorbed light. Don't die, Ana Rodriguez, Asterion said calmly, looking at the young woman's pale and battered face. Queen of the Sea Saddle Melicalbus. Chapter 147 Second Phase of the King's Game, 2. What Asterion summoned did not resemble a cursed spirit at all. Saddlemelech Albus appeared as a human woman with blue skin and long hair made of water, undulating like the waves of the sea. Her generous bust was hidden by 2 white shells. But unlike a normal human woman, instead of legs like any other person, she had a fish tail covered in blue scales, full of beauty and shine. In her hand, she held a golden trident. She looked like a sea goddess full of sacredness rather than a cursed spirit. Saddlemelech was about 10 meters tall, her enormous body resembling a masterpiece crafted by the gods. Her tail moved with surprisingly graceful motions, and a voice reminiscent of a siren's song hung in the air. When Saddlemelech appeared, a large wave surged and quickly spread, dragging trees, stones, and anything else in its path, including the Spanish team members themselves. Asterion stood on Saddlemelech's shoulder, looking at Anna with a calm gaze. He could feel the rapid consumption of magical energy. It was substantial, even though he controlled how much magical energy Saddlemelech could use. Otherwise, if he hadn't controlled Saddlemelech when she was summoned with the strength of a special grade warlock, the entire arena might have been submerged by now. Anna couldn't help but be shocked. Even though Saddlemelech had only the strength of a grade 2 warlock, she was truly a special grade cursed spirit. Her presence was so shocking that it made the young Spaniard pale in the face of the malice and terror emanating from the being before her. Even with her beautiful and charming appearance, in Anna's eyes, Saddlemelech was no different from a beautiful but extremely terrifying monster. Anna couldn't help but be shaken by the thought that Asterion Black might have dozens of other cursed spirits. She finally understood why everyone spoke to Asterion with such respect. The young man was the literal embodiment of the phrase, a one-man army. Taking a deep breath, Anna pushed those distracting thoughts away and focused entirely on the moment. Seeing water everywhere she looked, she had to admit that Asterion had chosen the perfect cursed spirit to suppress her. It should be noted that a wizard or witch does not gain total immunity by controlling a specific element. Take Anna, for example. She might not suffer damage if she put her finger in an electrical socket, but if lightning struck her, it would be a completely different story. Although she wouldn't die and would survive, she would be severely injured. Asterion was the same. Although he could create a cursed spirit capable of healing him, he wouldn't dare to put something like that inside his body. The negative magical energy would definitely corrode his body from the inside out. For this reason, Anna was apprehensive about using her innate technique in this water-filled environment. With a wave of Asterion's hand, he could turn Anna's power against her. Pulling out her wand, Anna decided to test Asterion with some spells to determine his current strength. If he was exhausted from summoning such a powerful cursed spirit, she would attack with all her might. If not, she would retreat and conserve her strength for the second phase of the king's game. With a flick of her wrist, her wand traced a half-moon path, and in an instant, a column of water shot toward Asterion, taking the form of a serpent with its mouth wide open. Asterion didn't even blink at the attack, and Saddlemelech raised her trident. The water serpent, instead of heading towards Asterion, changed direction and turned against its creator. Meanwhile, dozens of other water serpents formed around and attacked Anna without hesitation. Seeing this, Anna's expression changed dramatically as she leapt from branch to branch, dodging the dozens of water serpents. Her movements were graceful and skillful, and when she couldn't avoid an attack, she used transfiguration to create a barrier, buying time to dodge another attack. Suddenly, still in the air, jumping to another branch, a shiver ran down her spine. She tried to move, but she was still in the air with no foothold to change direction. Looking up, She saw Asterion above her, his fist covered in a black gauntlet getting closer and closer to her face. "You're not just fighting Saddle Melek," he said calmly as his fist struck her squarely in the face. Boom! Anna felt her brain shake violently. Even with the reinforcement magic on her body, she still felt intense pain. Her body flew downwards, landing heavily on the muddy ground. Feeling the wet touch on her face, Anna breathed heavily but quickly got up the next second. She wiped the mud from her face with the back of her hand and looked at Asterion with sarcasm. "You hit like a girl. I can do this all day." In a fighting stance, with somewhat unsteady steps, she looked at Asterion with determination. Hearing her words, Asterion raised an eyebrow and looked at Anna strangely. "You call that a provocation?" he asked in a strange tone. It was obvious she was trying to make him angry to create an opening, but Anna's choice of words wasn't the best. They only made him more amused than angry. Anna's lips twisted awkwardly at his amused tone, and she spoke in an embarrassed voice. "I was raised by my grandmother. She taught me to be very polite. She's probably watching the tournament right now, and I don't want to hear a several-hour-long lecture when I get back," she finished with an extremely embarrassed tone. Puff! Asterion couldn't hold back and let out a laugh. "Ha ha ha ha, what are you, a child? Who can't swear?" Wiping the tear from the corner of his eye, he asked playfully. He hadn't wanted to laugh, but the situation was too funny not to. Anna felt even more embarrassed by his laughter. At that moment, she just wished the ground would open up and swallow her whole to escape the awkward situation. As she was about to respond, a huge shadow appeared, covering her. She looked up and saw the cursed spirit arriving beside its master. Letting out a heavy sigh, laden with exhaustion and a touch of relief, she knew she had lost. Anna truly didn't understand how a grade 2 warlock could have so much magical energy. Even with the other side being suppressed to grade 2, in a battle of attrition, she was the one who lost. When Saddle Melek's trident was about to strike Anna, a shadow next to the tree rippled, and a person emerged from it, grabbed Anna, and submerged back into the shadows. The whole process lasted only an instant, and it was only then that Asterion reacted. His face turned extremely dark at that moment as he looked at the shadows and clenched his teeth. He had let his guard down because he never took this fight seriously from the beginning. He never truly cared about Anna from start to finish. He was going to win, of that he had no doubt, which is why he didn't stay alert to his surroundings. This allowed pests to hide in the shadows and successfully rescue Anna Rodriguez. Looking at Saddle Melek, Asterion ordered coldly, "Flood this entire damn forest." The cursed spirit obeyed its creator's orders and struck the ground with her trident, creating a wave with her at the center, spreading in all directions. He wanted to see if the insect hiding in the shadows could travel as fast when there were no shadows in this forest. The wave of water swept everything in its path, whether trees or stones, resembling an avalanche of destruction, obliterating everything in its way. Humph! Seeing no sign of the insect reappearing, Asterion snorted coldly, wasted no more time, and returned to his team. Chapter 148 Second Phase of the King's Game, 3, ha ha ha. Rose pointed at Asterion and said, still laughing, "You let an ant slip right under your nose." Hearing Rose's laughter, Asterion's already dark face became even darker. He clenched his teeth and vowed that when he found the warlock or witch with an innate shadow-related technique, he would make them suffer greatly before expelling them from the competition. Luna also didn't care about Asterion's dark face and laughed playfully while petting Baskerville. Only Cedric didn't laugh at Asterion. Instead, he gave him a friendly pat on the shoulder. "Don't worry, Asterion. In the end, we'll find them all, and you can vent your frustrations," he said kindly with a gentle smile. Seeing his friendly and close smile, Asterion looked at the young man strangely and spoke expressionlessly. "I don't like men, but don't worry, I don't care if you shove something up your butt." Ha 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 ha. Rose heard his words and couldn't help but burst into laughter. She held her stomach and laughed unscrupulously at Cedric's discomfort. Cedric was embarrassed and quickly removed his hand from Asterion's shoulder, stammering nervously and incoherently, I don't like men either. I like women." Cedric's awkward appearance only increased suspicions about him at that moment. Cedric looked at everyone and gradually fell silent. He crouched beside Luna and joined her in drawing something with an extremely dejected expression. "You're mean," Rose commented beside Asterion, her smile very amused by the whole situation. "Don't worry, I'll defeat all the enemies you can't," she said confidently, subtly provoking Asterion. "I don't need your help," Asterion replied coldly, looking at Rose before turning his gaze to the other team members. "Let's head to the highest mountain, we'll start the second phase of the King's game." "Yes, sir." Luna stood up and saluted like a soldier reporting to her superior. "Yes, sir," Rose responded casually, her voice full of laziness and sleepiness. "We're going to win and bring glory to Hogwarts," Cedric said, returning to his cheerful and friendly demeanor, apparently the most enthusiastic at the moment. Everyone smiled at Cedric's excitement. The young man seemed to be the soul of the team. However, after being unexpectedly selected to participate in the tournament, only Asterion knew that Cedric wanted nothing more than the fame brought by the tournament. For ordinary people, fame means just attention, but for powerful people, it is a legacy. It might seem strange, but people tend to trust those who possess fame and prestige. If there were two people side by side, one being a highly qualified professional and the other being a regular professional but very famous, who do you think people would trust more? The answer is clear, the regular professional, because fame has an almost supernatural glamour to people, making them seem almost like gods. So, even if the other one is highly qualified, few would give him a chance because he is not as famous as the regular professional. Asterion wanted this from the beginning. He had been building a good but powerful and wise image. Especially at this moment, when hundreds of thousands of witches and wizards were watching him. If possible, Asterion wanted his fame to help his children in case he passed away. His fame would help Daphne and her descendants unite the country and keep them safe if something happened to him in the future. After all, the god creation plan orchestrated by his ancestors was, at the very least, insane. Asterion had no idea what he might create if he failed. At the very least, he estimated it would create a virtually invincible cursed spirit. He had to leave some things to protect Daphne and her family. It wasn't that Asterion was pessimistic, he simply knew that this was the real world, and in the real world, things often don't go as one wants. Asterion wanted to be prepared in case something went wrong with his plan. After all, he knew he had made numerous enemies by creating the clock tower, even though most smiled kindly at him in most cases. But he knew the murderous intentions hidden behind calm and gentle looks. Holding Luna like a princess in his arms, Asterion looked at everyone and nodded. In the same second, everyone reinforced their bodies and ran towards the highest mountain. Asterion, who carried Luna like a princess, was the fastest in the group and was in the lead to protect against any possible attacks. Rose was at the back, protecting their rear, with Cedric in the middle. It was the same strategy that wolves in a pack use to protect themselves while hunting and moving from place to place. The four of them crossed high rocks, trees, and hills with almost supernatural ease. It was only when the sun began to set that the group stopped, but it wasn't because of Asterion or Rose, it was because of Cedric. "Sorry," the young man said with an embarrassed expression as sweat covered his body. Using reinforcement magic for such a long time was extremely exhausting. There was less than 10% of magical energy left in the Hufflepuff's reserves. If he continued, he would simply collapse from exhaustion. Placing Luna on the ground, Asterion shook his head and spoke calmly. "Don't worry, we're not in a hurry. Even if someone arrives before us, we'll just drive them away and start preparing the ground to protect Luna." "Yes, don't worry about it," Rose said with a smile, patting Cedric on the shoulder. Cedric looked grateful and remained silent, focusing on recovering his magical energy. Meanwhile, Asterion, Rose, and Luna made a campfire, around which they sat, eating the provisions given at the beginning of the first phase of the King's game. The supplies would last 3 days if rationed. "I hate jerky, it's too salty," Rose grumbled, very dissatisfied with the food as she swallowed a piece of jerky. She ate it out of necessity, otherwise, she would never touch something so salty. "It's not that bad," Cedric commented after tasting it. He actually didn't find it too bad. Luna remained silent, eating like a hamster and then swallowing without showing much reaction. "You seem used to eating this, Luna?" Rose asked curiously, seeing her expressionless face while eating. "I used to spend days in the forest trying to find magical animals," Luna looked up and answered adorably as she swallowed her food. Just as Rose was about to ask more, she smelled something pleasant in the air. She turned to Asterion and pursed her lips at the sight before her. It wasn't just her. Cedric and Luna also looked at Asterion with somewhat accusatory gazes. Asterion was sipping a glass of wine while biting into a delicious piece of roasted chicken. Rose looked at the hard, dried jerky in her hand and then at the succulent roasted chicken in Asterion's hand. Her gaze grew increasingly dangerous at the disparity in their food. "Asterion," Rose said each syllable with a tone full of accusation. Seeing the eyes of his teammates, Asterion remained indifferent. He ate even faster, fearing someone would ask for a piece of his roasted chicken. When he finished, he tossed the bone into the fire, making the air even more fragrant. Seeing Asterion's actions, Rose's eyes widened. She never imagined Asterion could be so stingy as to eat quickly and not leave any for her. Even Luna looked at Asterion with a deadly gaze, although it seemed more adorable than threatening. Under heavy pressure, Asterion reluctantly asked Baskerville to distribute the food and drank his wine in silence, apparently very upset about sharing his meal. Yet, for some reason, the atmosphere around the campfire was filled with laughter and teasing. Chapter 149 Second Phase of the King's Game, 4. When the sun rose, Asterion, Rose, Luna, and Cedric set off without delay, heading towards the mountain that seemed to grow taller as they approached. Seeing the mountain up close, Cedric gasped, his eyes widening. "Incredible! Knowing that human capacity can create this makes me understand why wizards and witches were considered gods in the eyes of Muggles." He spoke with genuine shock, his eyes fixed on the enormous monument raised by magic, filled with awe. Zeus, Hades, Poseidon, and any other gods were wizards and witches in the historical context of the magical world. What humans considered gods were merely wizards and witches who had reached the pinnacle of each element. However, even though wizards did not believe in these magical gods, the wizarding community still respected these beings because they abandoned everything else and focused entirely on just one branch of magic, innate technique. They became the very apex of all magic, without concern for anything else. Are they still alive? Rose asked curiously, her eyes on Asterion, clearly directing the question to him. Luna and Cedric also looked at Asterion with curious expressions. If there was one thing noble houses possessed, it was information and secrets, knowledge they monopolized over millennia, growing stronger with each passing century. Seeing everyone looking at him expectantly, Asterion rolled his eyes but ultimately chose to respond. Whether the magical gods are alive or not, I don't know. But in the late 1800s, it was said that a battle took place beneath Hogwarts, involving what seemed to be ancient magic, likely a legacy of a magical god. Ranrock III, a goblin king, sought this power and started another goblin rebellion. A fifth-year student successfully stopped the goblin king by killing him. If you want to know more about it, Dumbledore enrolled in Hogwarts a few years later. He probably knows more than I do. I only read a few accounts about it, Asterion concluded, focusing his gaze on the mountain. Rose's eyes sparkled as she listened to his words. If she could obtain that power, wouldn't she become even stronger? He complained about being too strong, but if there was a chance for her to grow even more powerful, Rose definitely wouldn't refuse. Summoning the winged centipede, Asterion jumped onto it and looked at the other 3 members of his team. Get on, we're flying up. Cedric grimaced at the sight of the terrifying cursed spirit. He definitely didn't want to climb onto something so frightening, but seeing the steep mountain, impossible for him to climb alone, the Hufflepuff representative sighed helplessly. Still somewhat hesitant to climb onto a cursed spirit, something he had always fought against during his time at Hogwarts, Cedric cautiously mounted it, keeping a wary eye on the cursed spirit, fearing it might attack at any moment. In contrast to the Hufflepuff boys' caution and fear, Rose and Luna were as eccentric as ever, with Luna, in particular, stroking the cursed spirit's carapace with a sweet expression. I never thought I'd one day be flying on a cursed spirit, Cedric sighed wearily, looking at the cursed spirit with a complex expression. Not as impressive as flying on your own, Rose commented nonchalantly. She could imitate flight using her innate technique, so flying on a cursed spirit didn't seem that special. Luna, are you this friendly with all cursed spirits? Asterion asked, noticing Luna petting the cursed spirit. No. I usually exorcise them when I encounter them. It's only when I see yours that I'm friendly. I might have a few screws loose in my mind, but I'm not stupid. Luna raised her head and looked at Asterion with a slightly offended expression, meeting the 14-year-old's red eyes. Can you blame him for asking something like that? Aside from Baskerville, even Asterion isn't as friendly with his cursed spirits as you are. Rose shook her head, speaking as she patted the platinum blonde girl's hair, her almost silvery blue eyes looking especially cute. Sometimes, Rose really wanted to open Luna's head and see what was inside. If her brain had any strange elements, she could understand it perfectly. The Ravenclaw representative was truly peculiar. Asterion didn't wait any longer and controlled the cursed spirit, flying towards the mountain peak, the center of the entire King's Game arena, and the place where the second phase of the King's Game would take place. This mountain is really tall, Cedric commented, looking down with a touch of fear. His legs trembled slightly, indicating that the young man wasn't exactly calm about the current situation. Rose noticed this and smiled mischievously. Who would have thought that the Hufflepuff representative is afraid of heights? Cedric's face showed obvious embarrassment at her words. He could already imagine becoming the butt of jokes in his common room after the tournament ended. Don't worry, Cedric, my dad is also afraid of heights. It's a very normal condition. Luna tried to comfort Cedric, but it only made the young man's expression worse. Not because of Luna's father, but because Luna herself was perfectly fine at this moment. He, a 19-year-old man standing 6 feet tall, was outdone by a 14-year-old girl standing 5 feet 2 inches. No matter how much he thought about it, Cedric knew he would be embarrassed for a long time. He knew his friends and was aware of how capable they were. We've arrived. Hearing Asterion's voice, Cedric's green eyes fell on the mountaintop. Contrary to what he had imagined, the entire area was perfectly flat, measuring about 100 meters in diameter. However, this only made Cedric's expression more solemn. 100 meters might seem large, but in a wizard's duel, a space of that size was barely adequate. Thinking about having to fight in such a small arena against dozens of people at the same time, Cedric's face darkened. It looks like we're going to have trouble protecting Luna, Rose commented, her expression serious for the first time in the King's game. She didn't think she would lose in a fight, but when it came to battling dozens of witches while protecting Luna at the same time, she could say with 100% certainty that she could protect her queen. Asterion agreed with Rose's words. Things had indeed become complicated given the size of the arena. It was truly problematic to fight in such a confined space. Additionally, he and Rose had to be careful not to destroy the entire mountain with their attacks. Then, Asterion's gaze fell on the throne in the center of the arena. It was empty and resembled a very high and wide stone throne, made of smooth slate-like ceramic. Someone could easily sleep on it like a bed. Luna, in particular, could sleep on it comfortably given her height. Beneath the throne, some furs were provided for added comfort for whoever would sit on it during the second phase of the King's game. Luna. Asterion looked at Luna and spoke calmly. Luna understood what Asterion wanted and walked over to the throne under the watchful eyes of Rose and Cedric. As she sat on the throne, the entire mountain began to glow intensely, the light condensing into a crown above the mountain. At that moment, regardless of the team, everyone looked at the crown above the mountain and realized that someone had taken the throne. The second phase of the King's game had just begun. Chapter 152nd Phase of the King's Game, 5, seeing Luna seated on the stone throne, Asterion, Rose, and Cedric acted according to the plan previously established, with a few adjustments due to the unexpected environment of the second phase of the King's game. Each took a corner around the stone throne, positioning themselves to form a triangle that protected Luna in the center. Cedric drew his wand and began altering the terrain through transfiguration, focusing primarily on the top of the mountain, where sharp spikes jutted out from the peak. If anyone looked at the mountain's summit at that moment, they would see gigantic spikes encircling the entire top. Rose also used her transfiguration skills to change the environment, making the mountain's peak particularly resistant by modifying its molecular structure with her 6 eyes. This not only prevented the peak from being easily destroyed but also ensured that no one could tunnel through the rocks from below to attack Luna while they were focused on fighting. Asterion simply spread small cursed spirits around to keep watch over the entire mountain with a 360-degree view. They would see the attacks coming. The three of them turned the terrain to their advantage, despite being the strongest in the tournament. Being powerful didn't mean they would just stand around, waiting to be attacked with their arms crossed. Especially knowing they would have to deal with dozens of opponents simultaneously, each team would have a cunning plan to take them down. Rose sat on the ground and waited in silence. She wasn't in a hurry to get into a good fight. She wouldn't underestimate these ants again like she did before. The battle against Hans Weiss had taught her that even an ant could cause her some damage if she wasn't cautious enough. Although her limitless was not activated at that time, Hans had still managed to hurt her. Asterion was also calmly waiting for the attacks to come, but unlike Rose, he wasn't as eager as the white-haired girl. He sat on the ground and closed his eyes, in no rush to start the fight. Luna lay on the stone throne, her body comfortably sprawled on the cushioned seat. She appeared completely relaxed and unconcerned about being the target of the entire competition. Cedric was different from the other three members of his team. He seemed the most nervous and cautious. His green eyes scanned the surroundings with vigilance, ready to strike at any moment. Everyone remained silent, but the atmosphere grew heavier as time passed, like a volcano gathering enough lava to create an eruption never seen before. This silence lasted for an hour before it was finally broken. Suddenly, Asterion opened his eyes and spoke calmly. "They're at the base of the mountain right now." Hearing this, Rose stood up and walked to the edge of the mountain peak, looking out between the sharp spikes. Her beautiful eyes focused on the small figures gathered at the base of the mountain. Her lips curved into an amused smile at the scene. From her perspective, it looked like tiny ants gathering to fight. However, something made Rose raise an eyebrow in surprise. "There are at least 6 teams, strangely, almost all men," Rose commented with a slightly puzzled expression. As far as she remembered, nearly all the teams had a balance of 2 male and 2 female members, so seeing so many men together was at least odd. Where were the women from the teams? "It doesn't matter. When they start climbing, begin attacking." Unlike Rose, Asterion didn't care whether men or women attacked him. They would all be defeated equally under the fist of strength. Rose nodded and picked up some stones, ready to play with them for a moment. "I have to gauge my strength well. I don't want to blow their heads off and get disqualified," she murmured to herself while playing with a stone the size of a golf ball. Cedric took a deep breath and drew his wand, ready to fight at the slightest disturbance. Luna, on the other hand, took some jerky from her supply kit and ate while looking up at the sky with her blue, almost silver eyes. If someone looked into them, they would see something akin to a silver river reflecting in her eyes. At the base of the mountain, Fleur looked at her enslaved followers with a cold gaze, 12 wizards of grade 2 and semi-grade 1. If she had more time, that number would be higher, but time waits for no one. Her gaze shifted to the massive mountain peak, where she could see terrifying spikes and small black dots flying around the mountain. "Has anyone ever told you that you're scary?" Ana Rodriguez, captain of the Spanish team, remarked, looking at the 12 men who only had eyes for Fleur Delacour. A shiver ran down her spine as she saw the eyes filled with obsession and sickly love in those men. She really admired Fleur. To stand in front of those eyes without changing her expression meant that Fleur had already gone through a lot to get to this moment. Many times, Fleur replied casually, her beautiful and exquisite face indifferent to the men's stares. "What can you tell us about Asterion?" she asked, looking at one of the 4 grade 1 wizards in this competition, being one herself. Previously, There were only 3 Grade 1 wizards, the captain of the Russian team, the captain of the American team, and herself, the captain of the French team. With Anna's arrival, they became 4. First of all, attacking Asterion Black by surprise is impossible, Anna responded without any hesitation. The senses of a special grade wizard are something beyond the human category, they are monsters in human skin. He would know even if you looked at him from hundreds of kilometers away, any disturbance in magic would catch his attention immediately. Strength, defense, speed, perception, and endurance, he possesses all of them. There are no weaknesses in these areas. His experience in fighting wizards and witches might be limited, but he compensates with monstrous reflexes and inhuman physical attributes. As for his innate technique, Anna's face showed a helpless expression when mentioning Asterion's innate technique. He's a one-man army. If he weren't limited to grade 2 strength, just his cursed spirits alone could finish us off. It was already stressful to fight against a limited special grade wizard, but it was even more stressful knowing that this special grade wizard carried dozens of special grade cursed spirits with him. Fleur wasn't surprised by the information Anna provided. If special grade wizards were so easy to defeat, they wouldn't be the pinnacle that every wizard or witch aspired to. In the eyes of all wizards and witches, the special grade was something they all longed for. These wizards and witches had already transcended the human category and become something superior. Besides Asterion, we have to fight against Rose Potter, Anna commented in an even more despairing tone. The girl killed a Dark Lord when she was just a baby. Even if there was more to the story, it didn't change the fact that a baby was responsible for killing one of the most violent and malevolent dark wizards. At the mention of Rose, Fleur's eyes changed slightly. Although Rose wasn't as famous as Asterion, who had recently killed a special grade wizard, the reports of her fighting against 3 special grade wizards in the Seven Powers War were a record more than frightening, etched in the annals of wizarding history. Fortunately, like Asterion, Rose would be limited and couldn't use much power, otherwise, dealing with her limitless would be something to worry about. After all, if you can't even touch your opponent, how can you defeat them? You seem to be waiting for someone else. Noticing that Fleur remained still, showing no signs of attacking the mountain, Anna asked with a confused expression. Send my men to find the other 2 teams. I'm waiting for 2 more grade 1 wizards to arrive. Fleur looked at the mountain with a calm gaze. We will attack together. Anna nodded, feeling much more confident with the next plan. For grade 1 wizards, the chances of making the Hogwarts team lose the first trial of the tournament were high. They've arrived. Anna and Fleur looked simultaneously in a certain direction and saw 2 teams emerging from the forest. 2 young men in particular caught both girls' attention. One had blonde hair and blue eyes, tall and muscular. He looked like a stereotypical school bully. However, he had a warm smile on his face and an especially shrewd look in his eyes. Michael Thorne, son of the president of Makusa. The other young man was equally large, even bigger than Michael, with black hair and green eyes. He seemed calm and composed, like an experienced soldier, especially his green eyes, filled with a penetrating and sharp gaze. Alexei Ivanov, son of the Russian Minister of Magic. Sorry for the delay, we had to fight off a few teams we encountered on the way. The first to apologize was unexpectedly Michael, who seemed the more prideful of the 2. Alexei merely nodded, indicating that he had encountered a similar problem but apparently didn't like to talk much. Let's begin, Fleur spoke in a tone that was almost a command, causing Anna, Michael, and Alexei to look at her with dissatisfied expressions. Fleur clearly noticed this but didn't seem to care. She had the advantage in this fight, and it was only natural that she would be the one to lead the attack, at least in her eyes. Next chapter, second volume, Chapter 151, second phase of the King's Game, 6, 152 second phase of the King's Game, 7, 153 second phase of the King's Game, 8, 154 second phase of the King's Game, 9, 155 second phase of the King's Game, 10, 156 second phase of the King's Game, 11, 157 second phase of the King's Game, 12, 158 second phase of the King's Game, 13e and 159 Death of Arcturus, 1, 160 Death of Arcturus, 2, Chapter 161 First phase of God's Creation Plan, 1, Chapter 162 First phase of God's Creation Plan, 2, Chapter 163 First phase of God's Creation Plan, 3, Chapter 164 First phase of God's Creation Plan, 4, Chapter 165 Valori of Arcuturus Black, 1, Chapter 166 Valori of Arcuturus Black, 2,